Scaling Her Dragon. BBW Paranormal Shapeshifter Romance. Paranormal Dating Agency. Book 8. Written by Millie Taiden. Narrated by Lauren Sweet. One. Times are changing, Victor said, turning to face his much younger sister, Razzie. His heart ached. He didn't want to think of leaving her behind. She was just coming of age, not old enough to search for a mate yet. The need to find someone wouldn't hit her until later. Victor, on the other hand, had the opposite problem. His dragon had been desperately looking for his mate, for the other soul that would connect with it and give him a reason for living. Without it, the animal would disconnect from Victor and eventually die. Dragon shifters needed the dual soul connection a mate gave them. Razzie stared at him, her big purple eyes filled with sadness. "Victor, there has to be something we can do." He smiled at the irony of his life. He'd just gotten his best friend back. His fellow dragons and the wolves were at peace after years of misunderstandings had ripped them apart. It was cause for celebration. But gloom whispered through the trees and mountains of Dragos land. Victor, their leader, was dying. "I've searched high and low. There's no one in this world for me." Razzie bit her lip. "What about the matchmaker? Did you speak with her?" He sighed hard as he dropped onto his chair. He'd never felt so old in his life. His dragon slept. His limbs felt heavy, and his body weighed him down. "I did. She promised to try, but we have little time." He lifted a hand to scratch at the long beard he'd been ignoring. His hair had grown past his shoulders. Victor wasn't vain, but this wasn't him. He stopped caring for his appearance the moment he realized he was close to his last breath from lack of a mate. "But—" "Soon," he said, hushing her with a look. "It will be your time. You will be in charge of our people. I need you to train to be the fighter you have inside." She shook her head, pacing his office and ignoring his words. "I am not their leader, Victor. You are." "We are of the royal Dragos bloodline, Razzie. You will rule." "I don't want to rule anything," she yelled, storming out of his office, her long hair bouncing down her back in a thick braid. He didn't bother going after her. There wasn't anything he could say to change things. This was their destiny. His dragon already showed signs of weakening. It was only a matter of time before he decided never to wake up again, leaving Victor so empty he'd die soon after. Victor glanced down at the lush land his family had taken care of for thousands of years. From the deep pink oceans to the yellow mountains his sister loved to run and fly over with her friends. A deep, painful ache took hold in his chest. Then, much to his surprise, anger blossomed. Acid-burning fury shot through his veins. Life was so fucking unfair. Unconsciously, his hand slapped to his chest. He gripped the ancient family heirloom dangling from his neck. A long, thick rope chain with a yellow diamond, a replicate of a miniature version of a dragon egg, rested at the center of his chest. The chain had been a gift from his father at birth. Unlike most diamonds, the one from the Dragos house was shaped in the form of a dragon's eye. He gasped as the shift to his animal swept through him. It had been so long, months, since he'd woken. The dragon had finally reappeared. The previous rage grew in Victor. Anger over his current position and lack of mate made him roar, spitting fire across the sky. Exhaling smoke, he shot into the air and soared. The wind caressed his animal's body. It was exhilarating to feel the dragon once more. How long would it last? He had no idea. He'd take whatever time he could with his other half. Another loud roar sounded from his chest. The dragon blew another puff of air into the clear sky. He knew the animal was angry. He was angry too. Not much could be done about that. There was no blaming anyone over his lack of a mate. His dragon pulled away from him. The communication that had been so seamless before took effort to understand now. It was a battle for control most days. Mainly, the dragon was giving up on life. Victor had started to do the same. He glanced down at the cleared forest. He moved fast and far. Below, another dragon caught his attention. He folded his wings back and dove, his body bolting faster than normal. An angry, loud thump sounded when he landed. The other dragon drank from the cool springs flowing from the ice mountains. No need to shift into his body to talk. They connected through their animals telepathically. A red dragon lay by the edge of the springs, his claws digging into the soft grass. The dragon glanced at Victor, his gaze filled with surprise. "Victor," said his cousin Draken. "Draken, how are you?" Victor asked. His dragon urged for another flight, but Victor waited. Draken's eyes narrowed. "I haven't seen you in months." He sniffed, rubbing his face over the back of his claw. "My mother has asked me many times about your health, but when I come over, you're never available." He eyed his cousin with interest. "Glad to see you're still doing well." Victor shuffled his feet, tail swishing side to side, so close to the trees, he felt the graze of the leaves on his scales. "As you can see, I'm still here. In the event something happens, Razzie will take over. She's next in line." "She's so young," Draken said. "Dragonlings are so reckless." He stretched his wings wide, the light filtering through his translucent, glittering flesh. "She should be more careful. We wouldn't want to have to find someone to take over for her." Victor didn't sense a threat in Draken's words, but he knew if given the opportunity, his cousin would happily take over Dragos land. As long as Victor lived, and his dragon gave him the ability to protect his loved ones, nobody would lay a hand on Razzie. "How is your mate search going?" Draken asked, his red eyes appearing brighter. "I've stopped searching," he admitted. They were shifters. Draken would know if Victor lied. The last thing he needed was his cousin to feel any kind of sympathy over his problems. "Some people are not meant to have a mate in their lives." Draken's only reply was a low rumble. "I'll come by the castle in a few days." "Don't. I'm fine. I don't need you checking on me." In fact, if they knew how much the disconnection between Victor and his dragon grew, they'd definitely worry. The animal had shut down some of their links. Mental and emotional ties with the beast had grown distant. At this point, he knew there was no finding a female. With his dragon this unstable, he wouldn't even recognize his mate if she stood directly in front of him. Draken stretched his neck, glancing at the sky. "Mother is worried over Razzie." "She's fine. I watch over my sister." Victor growled. "Yes, but for how long?" Draken asked. "For as long as I live." The angry roar came out with a plume of smoke. Fire burned at the back of his throat. His dragon itched to get off the ground and go. He didn't bother saying goodbye. The need to fly became his sole focus. He kicked off, shooting through the sky, glancing at the colorful mountains where the wolves lived. His life might be ending, but he would teach his sister how to lead it all. Razzie needed to be tough. Her life would change soon. A new wave of fury filled his chest. What should be making him happy, a mate, was destroying him, all because he couldn't find her. Why were Alex and Breck and Eros so different? Why were they gifted one, but he wasn't? He roared, letting his frustration out with a long trail of fire. He needed to stop questioning the fates. Reality was, he didn't have a mate. The bitterness in his veins grew. He would stay away from his happy friends. He'd only impose on them with his death watch. It was time to focus on preparing his sister for life after him. His soul was no longer important. Two. Rebecca glanced around her room in the Lion's Palace. She'd hardly taken a motion sickness pill when Jerry advised her that travel could get rough. The problem with her pills was they made her incredibly groggy. At the moment, she was having a hard time not falling asleep before she got a chance to speak to Bella, or even Jerry again. The damn room wasn't helping. It changed colors. Even though Jerry had warned her, it caught her off guard to see everything changing to look like a giant dragon lair. The walls transformed into a stone texture, and the bedding and curtains turned shiny silver, covered with tiny, golden dragons. It was the bedroom of her dreams. She pulled out her green and gold stuffed dragon and laid it on the bed. There, now it really looked like the best place to sleep. A knock sounded at the door. She yawned and sat at the edge of the bed, taking hold of her bed partner, her stuffed dragon, Hector. "Come in." Jerry marched inside, glancing around the room with a grin. "I see you've made yourself at home, huh?" "I don't know what the hell is up with this room. Where did it get that I want to be in a dragon's lair?" Becca asked, stifling another yawn. "The room reads your mind and changes things to what you find most comfortable." Jerry ran a hand over the tiny dragons on the curtains. "I'm taking a guess here, but you might have a thing for scaly creatures." Becca shook her head. "No, not really." Jerry raised her brows and stared pointedly at Becca's hands, where she held her stuffed dragon. "Really?" "Okay, maybe a little. I find dragons fascinating," she admitted. "They're so big and dangerous, but beautiful at the same time. When I was a little girl, I used to dream of climbing onto a dragon's back and being taken to a land of happiness, away from the evil." "Evil?" She grinned. "My parents. As a kid, I swore they were wicked." "That's some imagination you have," Jerry mused. "Will you have issues with your family attorney handling the rental of your and Charlotte's homes?" "No, he's really great. His father used to do our dad's business stuff, and now his son, Darren, has been great about doing what's needed without asking questions." Jerry pulled out a chair and sat next to an antique table. She picked up a large pitcher and filled 2 glasses with a red liquid. Becca stood, her body groaning from her sleepiness. She took one of the cups Jerry offered and sipped. "That's Sidai wine. It's a favorite here." Becca tasted the sweet flavors of fruit, but no liquor. "Are you sure this is wine? It tastes more like punch." Jerry laughed. "Drink it really fast and see how quickly your face lands on the floor." She was tempted, but wouldn't. Jerry hadn't really dared her. One of Becca's weaknesses was she always took a dare, and usually got herself into trouble, like skydiving when she'd been too chicken to jump off a plane, and bungee jumping when she hated heights. Oh, she'd done it, but she hadn't really liked it. She'd continually gone against her better judgment just to prove she could do anything. It hadn't always worked to her benefit. Sometimes she ended up hurt. One time, she wore roller skates to show the kids she mentored that she could skate. Well, She couldn't walk without tripping over her own feet, much less skate, and she ended up with a broken wrist. "Tell me more about this matchmaking business of yours," Becca said, sitting back while holding on to her drink with one hand and her stuffed dragon with the other. Three. It's quite simple. Shifters of all kinds ask me to find them mates, and I do my best. Human females ask me to help get the right man for them, and I find them shifters. "Is it always a shifter?" Becca asked, her curiosity spiking. Charlotte came to this planet with Jerry and found herself not one, but 2 men she fell in love with. If that wasn't a testament of Jerry's ability at matchmaking, she didn't know what was. "Yes, I run a paranormal dating agency, darling. Guys with fur looking for girls with curves." She raised her brows. "Curves? That's right. The men who use my services prefer big, beautiful, bold, confident women," Jerry replied. "I understand not all women will be confident with their bodies, especially with the fiasco that is society on Earth, but having some love for their curves is a must." Becca nodded. "I understand that. So many women, and even men, have to deal with someone constantly putting them down and making them feel like shit because of their weight. It's nice to have a service to get someone who won't make you feel bad over the extra cushion in the trunk." She sighed. "Someone who actually wants the curves and the padding." "What about you?" Jerry asked. "Are you leaving a man behind?" She shook her head and drank more wine. The fruity flavors warmed her belly and made her feel even more relaxed. "Nope. Unlike Charlotte, who just had shitty luck with men, I can't find one who holds my attention. Don't get me wrong, I've dated interesting guys, but they thought my being with them meant I would spend all day long at the gym because they wanted me to lose weight." "Seriously?" Jerry asked. She made a face of disgust. "Why do men do that? And not just men. Society as a whole. I've had people stare at me while eating, like I'm breaking a rule, but they don't know I've hiked 4 miles. And honestly, I don't think they'd care. I've even gotten jerks asking me, 'Do you really want to eat that?'" Jerry's eyes widened. "You're kidding, right?" She growled. "Do I want to eat that? Damn straight I do, asshole." But I have to admit, I held my composure and managed to only call the guy a jackass because I actually wasn't feeling very good. She took a breath to calm down. "The point is that, yes, I've had assholes I've been in relationships with. They wanted me to fit their body standards, and I didn't. That meant I got dumped and told how I didn't fit in with society's views of beauty." "Tell me you didn't believe them." Jerry stared at her, waiting for a response. "Sometimes, when I'm down, I wonder. But the truth is, I've a lot of self-love for my curves. I think I look good. So what if I have rolls or chub or flabby thighs? Damn it, I have bat wings." "Really?" Jerry asked. "Yes. You know, that soft skin on your arms, that sort of wiggles and isn't top-of-the-line bicep perfect? Yeah, that. I got that. But on the plus side, I have a big ass." She giggled. "Guys seem to be fond of that." She nodded at Jerry's smirk. "I bet." Jerry laughed. "I know quite a few shifters who love some big curves. Are men's opinions important to you?" She shook her head. "Not really. Despite what men think, I know I look good. I may not be everyone's ideal of beauty, but I'm my own woman, and one day I'll be someone else's. A man who deserves me, who loves me as I am, without wanting a single thing changed in me." "Have all men been that way?" She shook her head. "I have had a few nice guys, but it feels wrong to be with them after a while, like they don't get me." "Wrong how?" Jerry frowned. You'd think a good guy would make you feel good. Right? She scooted up the bed, bringing her back to the wall and curling her feet under a pillow. No, these guys haven't been bad. We just didn't emotionally connect. I want a man who will make me feel things. Passion, desire, need. Not just expect to have sex because he's there, you know? Oh, Jerry nodded slowly. I know. So why not give my services a try? She winked. You never know what kind of smoking, fiery man you may end up with. She laughed at the way Jerry waggled her brows. I don't know if I want anyone I need to carry a fire extinguisher for. What are some of the characteristics you want in a man? Becca pursed her lips and thought about it. I guess a man who will appreciate me, who likes to laugh, someone who loves to spontaneously take off and do things. I have a deep love for going to new places, so that would be fun. I love to explore. That could be cool. Maybe he can like being home, too. Someone who is comfortable and easy. She laughed. I think I want a dog, not a man. Jerry giggled. I was about to ask if sex means a lot to you. She nodded. Hell yes. Please. Look, I'd want a man who's not good at that. I want that fire and smoking hot passion we spoke of earlier. Jerry nodded. Sheet-burning sex, huh? Oh, yes. Becca nodded vigorously. I'll take that times 5, please. You might need that fire extinguisher for that, though. Does it matter? She grinned. If he's that good in bed, I'll happily strap on a full fireman's outfit and wait for him to light my fires. You seem to be pretty laid back over finding a man, not as frustrated as other clients I've had. Why is that? Jerry refilled her cup and offered Becca more wine, but she shook her head. I guess it's because I have faith that I will meet the right man someday. I know it may not be today, tomorrow, or soon, but I will. There's no way I'll go through my entire life alone. I'm fun. I'm nice. I'm cute. And I have a smoking hot body. What's not to love? She laughed. Jerry laid an elbow on the table and shook her head. I really like you. I'll find your man, Becca. You'll see. Becca yawned again. No pressure. Not like he'll die if he doesn't meet me in the next few days. I've got all the time in the world. Oh, honey, you have no idea what's in store for you. IV. Victor growled and slammed a door on one of his underlings. The anger inside him had grown like mold, eating through every moment of happiness from the past. Fury over his impending doom was all he had left. A knock sounded at his door. His dragon pushed at the skin. Lately, the animal showed himself more when Victor found himself unable to control the rage. What? He roared. The door jerked open, and Razzie marched in, her gaze filled with disbelief. Did you really just yell at Raymond? He shrugged, turning away from her and pushing off the slice of guilt in his heart. Raymond had been his assistant for years. He'd never disrespected Victor. Victor's anger over his numbered days was getting out of hand. What do you want? Razzie narrowed her eyes. I want you to get out of this room. You've been stuck here for days. How in the world are you supposed to run this kingdom from your office? The change of seasons is approaching. I want to host a ball. Victor glanced out his window, his gaze on the rocky drop from the side of the castle to the raging river below. Do whatever you want. You'll need to host with me, Vic. You can't just hide away from our friends. She insisted, her voice filled with concern. No. He whirled around to face her. I'm not interested in seeing any of their happy faces. She flinched, taking a step back. Victor, she said softly. "What's happening to you?" He glanced away again.
"Death. That's what's happening to me. Soon I'll be nothing but a memory."
"Don't speak like that, brother," she gasped. "You know this is your kingdom. These are your people. They would be lost without you." He shook his head, watching her sad expression reflected in the window glass.
"Go plan your ball, Razzie. Don't worry about me."
He'd stopped worrying about himself. When he'd been a kid, his father taught him that being a great leader didn't mean having to be there. Leaving a legacy was just as important. For Victor, that would be Razzie. She'd take his place when the time came. He hated that she'd have to start making decisions for others and worrying about having to find a mate soon. Razzie turned on her heels, stomping away and slamming the door behind her. He didn't think about following her. She'd learned to control her outbursts with time. A loud thumping sounded at his door, followed by,
"Victor, open this door or I'll push it down." "It's open."
He knew nothing he said would push Breck away. There was none of that with his friend. Breck entered, his brows dipping in a fierce scowl.
"Why have you ignored all our invitations? Charlotte feels like you're angry with her."
Charlotte, Breck and Darrow's mate, was a beautiful human with a soft and loving heart. No matter what he was going through, Victor couldn't take his frustrations out on her. She was innocent in all this.
"I'm sorry, Breck. I'm just not in the right mindset to be around others."
Especially mated, happy others. He didn't want to say how much harder it was to control his dragon's fury lately. Breck marched farther into the room and through the door behind him, shutting it with a harsh click.
"I understand all that, but we're your friends. We're here for you. Don't hide. We can help." "No, you can't,"
Victor snapped. He took a deep breath and curled his hands into fists, trying hard to keep the change from taking over.
"I have to handle this on my own now." "Give us a chance. Come over. Charlotte's sister is coming in the next day or two. I'm sure it would be nice to meet someone who's not from around here,"
Breck said, shoving his hands into his pockets.
"We want to get you out of the mood you're in." "You mean the I'm going to die in a few days mindset? That's kind of hard since it's true,"
he said, voice filled with sarcasm.
"Razzie is hurting seeing you this way,"
Breck threw back.
"Is that what you want? For her to be thinking of your imminent demise forever?"
Fuck. No, that wasn't what he wanted. What he wanted was his dragon to stop trying to control him, for him to not feel all that anger. He wanted a lot of things he wasn't getting at the moment.
"I'll talk to her." "Do that."
Breck came closer, his gaze sweeping Victor from head to toe.
"Have you already given up on life, my friend?"
Victor growled, turning away.
"My appearance no longer matters. There are more important things to worry about now. None of them revolve around me."
Breck sighed and turned to go.
"I understand. Just know I'm here for you. I've gotten one of my best friends back now. I don't want to lose you before it's time."
Victor listened to Breck's strong footsteps as he left his office. Once he'd gone, Victor sat with a groan. Life was getting harder to handle. Even with so little time left, things didn't get any easier. "5. Becca wiggled in the soft material Charlotte gave her to wear under her clothes. She had no idea how her sister could live in icy mountains. It was damn cold up here. Becca's ideal place would be by the sea, or in a spa. You could never go wrong with a spa. Jacuzzis were her favorite. She could spend hours in one, just letting the jets massage her all over. What are you doing? Charlotte giggled, watching her from the bedroom door.
Dancing in my pajamas,
she replied, wiggling her ass some more.
They're not pajamas.
They keep you warm so you don't have to wear every piece of clothing you brought with you.
Thank God for that. It's cold as fuck up here. How the hell do you manage to stay warm?
She flipped around with a huge grin.
Never mind. I know how you stay warm. Those two hunky men who keep eating you up like your ice cream.
Charlotte laughed.
At least they're not looking at me like they're lactose intolerant.
She shook her head, chuckling.
So, what are we doing today?
We're not doing anything, Charlotte said with a pout.
I'm sorry, sis.
I have to go with the guys to visit Breck's sister. Her little girl is teething, and apparently I'm the only one who can calm her down. Just call me the baby whisperer.
You?
Becca gasped. You were so not a kid person before. She's really cute, Charlotte said.
That's fine. I can go for a walk and check out the area.
It all looks nice from up here, but I bet down by the river things are much prettier up close.
That's right,
Charlotte agreed. We won't be gone long. If you want, you can come with us, or you can wait till I return.
Nah, I'm good.
I can walk and see the alien life. Charlotte slipped on a jacket.
They're not really aliens. They're shifters.
I know. It's just fun to say aliens. I keep thinking something is going to pop out of my chest and try to make me its mama.
You have issues.
Charlotte laughed, walking out of the room. Becca had walked a lot, a heck more than she was used to. She pulled out a bottle from her backpack and gulped on the water. She'd been tempted to fill the bottle with wine, but Charlotte warned against it. Still, she'd had a few cups of the fruity punch before she left. Now she felt she could take on the world. She wondered if it was a side effect from the wine or the height. Shit. She'd forgotten that heights made a person feel liquor a lot faster. Fucking hell. She blinked, bringing the forest into focus. This was probably not a good time for her to realize she was a little bit tipsy. It wasn't as cold in this area as it had been on the other side of the river, closer to the icy mountains where Charlotte lived. The hills here were a soft yellow, covered with bright burgundy trees. She could see fruits high up on the branches, but had no idea what they were. Instead of walking, she sat under the shade of one particularly giant tree and leaned back on the trunk. The grass was thick and soft, a nice cushion to help her feel comfortable. She glanced at the sky and smiled. 2 suns. The bigger one was a bright yellow, while the other was more blood orange. Both appeared to be really close to the planet. At first glance, her heart skipped a beat from the thought that they were falling into aurora. A shadow appeared over the sun. She frowned, wondering what it was, until the distinct image of wings made her jerk to a sitting position. What the hell? In awe, she watched the animal glide through the sky. No, not happening. This was a shifter planet, but there was just no way in hell she was seeing what she thought she was seeing. This was the product of too much wine. Dragons were mythical creatures. She'd never heard of one as a shifter on Earth. Never. Her attention returned to her surroundings. The sound of shuffling between the branches made her glance around, looking for what made the noise. Suddenly, a young girl appeared out of nowhere. She met Becca's gaze and squealed.
You're here!
Okay.
Hi, Oh, I know who you are. You're Charlotte's sister, Rebecca.
The girl grinned.
I'm Razzie.
Hello, Razzie. Yes, I am Becca. How are you?
Great. I've been dying to meet you. Charlotte told me all about you and how you can't be dared to do things because you actually do them.
Out of all the things Charlotte could have told people about Becca, she'd chosen that. That was her sister. Yeah, I do have a bit of a problem turning down a dare, it seems. Razzie laughed, her beautiful purple eyes glowing. I think that's awesome. Shows you're confident in yourself. And stupid. Confident and stupid. No. She laughed harder. Don't say that. I can tell you like to have fun. I do too. I love Charlotte. She's so nice. I don't have many friends who give me good advice. I love having her so close. Razzie glanced around. Are you sitting here for a reason, or would you like to walk with me? More walking? She guessed it was easier going toward the warmer side than returning up the cold mountain. Not to mention, she really didn't want to climb. Sure, we can walk. She groaned, her muscles aching as she stood. Come, you have to see the garden we have at the palace. Razzie gushed. We have the prettiest rainbow flowers ever. She didn't bother asking about another palace. Apparently, each shifter nation had their own leader, most of which lived in a bigger holding. If Razzie's castle was anything like Alex's, she'd fall in love all over again. Charlotte and her wolves lived in a massive cabin at the top of the mountains. That didn't mean it wasn't the size of what most estates were on Earth. It just had an earthier feel than a castle. She wondered what kind of shifter Razzie was. Six. They followed a path of big red and yellow flowers that reminded her of sunflowers, only the center of the flower was yellow and the petals and stem were red. She didn't get too close, for fear her allergies would go crazy. She'd been taking her allergy meds since she arrived. Jerry told her she didn't need meds, because she should not have allergy problems in Aurora, but she didn't want to chance it. Razzie, you have the prettiest purple eyes, Becca said when the girl smiled at her again. Thank you. Charlotte said the same thing. It's so strange to hear someone else say that. Since we all have different eye colors, it's normal to see such variety. Razzie picked up one of Becca's shoulder-length curls and rubbed it between her fingers. I love the texture of your hair and the color of your skin. Unlike Razzie's paler complexion, Becca had a warm cinnamon coloring that allowed for her to tan nicely. Thanks. I love the color of my skin, too. Not sure about the hair. You should see it when it's wet. It's everywhere. Razzie smiled. I wish my hair curled. It just falls in this long, straight, boring mess. Darling, you have beautiful hair. I'd kill for the shine in yours. She laughed at the irony of life. Isn't that always how it is? We want what we don't have. They neared a massive stone wall. A doorway appeared out of nowhere, and Razzie grabbed her by the hand and led her inside. Come on, you're going to love the flowers. Doors appearing out of nowhere. 2 suns. Weird colored flowers and blue snow. Yeah, she really hadn't had enough of that wine yet. They crossed into an open courtyard. They passed people who stared at Becca with curiosity. She stared back. Their eyes amazed her. Orange, blue, green, silver, pink, and every color of the rainbow she had ever seen looked back at her. This was the most colorful planet in the universe. Hallway after hallway, they went, until a giant opening brought them to a massive garden. She gasped, her gaze busy taking in the beauty of the pristine garden. Holy shit! Razzie chuckled. You have the best reactions. Are you kidding me? This isn't just a garden. This is like every garden ever made put together. She whispered in awe. She took a few steps toward the closest flower, a deep green with specks of red and pink and a blue stem. The flower was the size of her head. She lifted a hand to touch it, but stopped midway. What's wrong? Razzie asked. Don't you like the baby flowers? Becca snorted. Baby? Yes, they can grow in size. We call these babies because they are hybrids and much smaller. The originals grow in the wild, and can be the size of a dragonling. She'd never heard of a dragonling flower, so she wasn't sure how big that was.
The flower is beautiful, but I shouldn't touch it. I'm allergic.
I promise they will not harm you. Our flowers do not contain the same pollen your earth flowers do. She was tempted. After an internal debate, she leaned forward and touched the petals with the tips of her fingers.
This is unreal. They're so soft.
We have a bed of pillis, Razzie said. Come, I'll show you.
She turned to follow the girl and frowned. I don't know what pillis are.
Razzie stopped suddenly and lifted a hand to point in front of her. That's them.
Becca's jaw dropped. Tiny flowers with petals in every color ever created covered a large section of the garden, making them look like they were a kaleidoscope wave. Wow, she gasped, her legs refusing to move, keeping her rooted to the spot.
We call the bigger ones rainbow flowers. The babies are called pillis.
Razzie turned to her with a wide grin.
I knew you'd love it. Charlotte loves these flowers. We don't pick them. We admire nature as it is meant to be. Unless someone is getting mated, to celebrate the union, we do not kill plants.
Your planet is beautiful.
Razzie nodded. I love it. I'm glad you're here. I hope you will come to my ball.
Ball?
She asked, still a little dazed from the walking, the wine, and the high altitude. Yes, Charlotte promised to come. We're celebrating the turn of the seasons. Our people are coming out of sleep, and I think a celebration is in order.
Her lips tipped down, and sadness filled her gaze.
Mother loved having one every year when she was alive.
Damn, how could she say no to that face?
I'll be there. I think it's a great thing you're doing, keeping her memory alive with tradition. Thank you. Razzie's eyes crinkled at the corners with her smile. I didn't think anyone else understood.
Seven. Becca glanced at the blanket she'd been given to wear as a dress. She had no idea how to make something elegant out of it. The best she could do was tie the thing over her shoulder and go toga style. Her bedroom door swung open, and Charlotte waltzed in, wearing a gorgeous gown in the ice blue color of the mountain she lived on.
Wow, you look amazing, Becca said. Meanwhile, I'm going to look like I'm wearing your curtains to the ball. Charlotte frowned at the way Becca had draped the blanket over her shoulders. What in the world are you doing with that dress?
Dress? The blanket was a dress? Wearing it?
Charlotte slapped a hand on her forehead. I'm so dumb. I forgot you don't know how to wear these things. I thought Jerry or someone in Alex's castle would have shown you how. She rushed to Becca and held the sheet under Becca's arm. Strapless ball gown in her favorite color. Becca gasped as the material tightened around her bust, fitting over her breasts and flaring down into a gorgeous golden dress. There was no need or space for a bra.
How in the hell did this sheet turn into a dress?
It's all artificial intelligence. Your favorite color is gold, and it picked a design that will flatter your curves, Charlotte said with a smile. You look beautiful. Becca still couldn't believe the thin sheet she'd been playing with had reshaped itself, and even changed thickness and color to become a gorgeous dress.
I felt really bad for Razzie,
Becca said, putting on a pair of diamond studs she rarely used. Her grandmother had given them to her on her 16th birthday. Their Nana had been such a nice woman, more caring to her and Charlotte than their own parents. I know, Charlotte said. If it weren't for Razzie, I don't think I'd be going anywhere near that castle. Becca frowned, taking the shawl Charlotte handed her and watching it change to match her dress. Why not? There's a lot of stress over there. I'd rather stay on this side. Becca nodded.
But that poor girl was trying to do something nice for her mother's memory. They couldn't leave her hanging, not when she was waiting for them to show up. "Come on, let's visit with her and meet your neighbors." Becca gasped at the number of beautiful and colorful gowns she saw. Every color in the rainbow, much like the flowers in the garden, filled the massive hall. She took a glass of wine from a passing waiter and smiled a thank you. "That's Razzie," Charlotte said. "She looks amazing." Razzie wore a beautiful A-line gown that matched her eyes. She glanced around the room full of guests and made a beeline for them. "You came!" She hugged Charlotte first, and then Becca. "I'm so happy you two showed up." "I'm sorry Bella couldn't make it," Charlotte sighed. "Pregnancy can make a woman exhausted." Razzie nodded, her eyes sparkling with delight. "I can't wait to meet their babies." Charlotte glanced away and then smiled at Becca and Razzie. "Give me 2 minutes. Brack is calling. He has that look on his face that scares most people. It's his way of getting me to pay attention to him." "Go on," Razzie said. "I have Becca. We'll have fun." "I'm a little afraid to hear that." Charlotte laughed as she walked away. Becca's gaze roamed the massive hall. Decorated in silver and gold, it was truly fit for a king. "This place is amazing." "Come on," Razzie said, looping her arm with Becca's. "Let me give you the grand tour. I have something very fun in mind." They went down a hallway farther from the mass of guests and through a doorway that appeared to be a quiet set of private rooms. "I don't think we're supposed to be on this side." Razzie giggled. "I have a dare for you." Uh-oh. She glanced around the long, dimly lit hallway. "Am I going to get arrested?" Razzie frowned for a moment. Then she shook her head and laughed. No getting arrested. I just want you to go into the library and find the book with the woman on the cover and spine." That was it? A woman? Razzie's eyes twinkled with humor. "Yes." "There's a catch. I know there is. I bet there's 50 books like that, aren't there?" No, just one. I'll even tell you that the books are filed by color. The one you're looking for is black." Razzie pointed down the hall. "4th door to your left." Damn it. The girl tempted her so much. "What do I do if I get this?" "I hear you like dragons." Razzie's smile widened. "I happen to have a very cute purple dragon-eye gem that's been passed down my family line. I will part with it for you." "Are you insane? I don't want a family heirloom." She shook her head. "I'll do this, but no giving me stuff that should go to your children." Razzie blinked her eyes wide. "Okay, but you'll do it?" Ah, hell. Of course she would. Now she wanted to see what was so special about the damn book. "Yes." Eight. Victor took the back stairs, staying away from the guests and the majority of the castle employees. He was in no mood to speak to anyone. The last thing he needed was to accidentally see someone who wondered why he looked the way he did and decided to make idle conversation. He stomped his way to his office. His dragon pushed at the skin, seeking to fly again. For a second, he stopped at the door, his rage pushing him away. Something felt different about his space. He entered the room quietly, wondering why his dragon roared internally. He scanned the room until he found what he was looking for: the intruder. He watched a pair of hips swing side to side as a woman in gold shifted from foot to foot. "Holy shit!" she breathed. "I knew there had to be a catch." She flipped through a page and gasped. "Wow, I wish I knew a man with enough strength to do some of these." He frowned, wondering what she could be looking at. The scent of her arousal reached him. Something turned her on. He wanted to know what that was, He took a step closer, then another. She wiggled her hips again, and that's when he realized she was squirming. "Oh my God, this chick knows how to have fun," she choked. "3 guys? Who the hell takes on 3 men? Half the time, I can't even deal with one without wanting to murder him." He frowned. She really loved talking to herself. He wasn't in the mood to play host and wanted the chick gone. The rage filling him pushed away any other emotion. "You're trespassing," he said, his voice full of authority. She whirled around, holding a large volume of sexual acts pressed to her chest. "Christ, have you ever heard of knocking?" Beautiful, big brown eyes the color of soft honey, framed with thick, dark lashes, stared at him. Her generous lips formed a slight pout. She was breathtaking, and not just her rounded face with flawless brown skin. The curves hidden under her dress sent desire shooting through him, something he hadn't felt in almost a year. He frowned. "No, this is my office. Why would I knock?" She glanced at him, up and down, scrunching her nose in distaste. "Forget knocking. Have you ever heard of a brush? A razor?" She sniffed. "Cologne?" "Once again," he said, his voice deeper than before. "You are trespassing. The ball is down the hall." She winced. "I'm sorry. Razzie asked me to come in here and get a book." She gave an apologetic smile. "I didn't think this was anyone's office." "It is. Now get out." He heard the words come out of his mouth and wished he could take them back. It wasn't her fault he was angry with life. Watching her lovely, dark features as she continued to stare at him, he thought about how long it had been since he'd been with a woman. Too long. Her perfectly lined brows flew up until he saw a spark of anger light her eyes. "Wow, you're in need of some manners." "I have manners." He turned to point to the door. "You can get out through there." She blinked, gripping the book so tightly he saw her knuckles discolor. "I thought people on this planet were supposed to be nice and happy. What the hell crawled up your ass and died?" "You are trespassing where you're unwanted," he said, his rage growing. She took a step closer to him, and through the cloud of fury and anger. His dragon got a whiff of her essence. The animal pushed harder to be let out. Desire bloomed in him for the annoying stranger. Something about her got to him. He'd lost a lot of himself in the need to keep his dragon awake. The only way to do that was closing off all emotions other than anger. A knock sounded at his door, and it opened to his cousin Draken. He stared back and forth between Victor and the ball guest. "I heard yelling," Draken said. "Is everything okay?" "Yes," Victor growled. "No!" The woman with the striking honey-brown eyes and tempting lips said. "I'm going to need someone to show me back to the ballroom." Draken grinned, showing more interest than necessary in the curvy goddess. "Allow me. I'd be happy to show you back to the ball." He passed Victor on his way to the woman. The ire in Victor knew no bounds. He clenched his hands at his sides. The dragon urged him to interfere, to yank her away from Draken and rip his cousin limb from limb. She smiled at Draken. Jealousy roared to life inside him. What did he care if she smiled at his cousin? She wasn't his. Another emotion tried to tug at his anger-filled heart, but there was little room for anything other than fury in Victor. "Thank you," she said, taking the arm he offered. Then she turned to Victor with pursed lips. "Sorry about your office. I didn't mean to intrude in your space." Her words, and the hint of hurt he heard in her voice, tried to call forth emotions he'd locked away. His dragon huffed, pushing him to be let out. Victor watched Draken escort the woman out of the room. He listened intently as they walked. "Hi, I'm Becca, Charlotte's sister," she said softly. "Thanks for showing me back to the ball."
"Hello, beautiful Becca. I'm Draken of the Dragos house. I'm happy to keep your company. A lovely woman like yourself shouldn't be alone."
Their voices faded until he couldn't hear any more of their conversation. Becca. Why did he care? He shouldn't. He'd closed off any and all thoughts of mating. But he could still be with a woman, and Becca's curves tempted and aroused him more than anyone had in a very long time, if ever. He needed to fly. His gut told him there was something he was refusing to see. It was harder when his dragon could barely communicate with him. There was a broken link where his emotions were concerned. Not that he needed emotions. They would only weaken him now that he knew death was imminent. Nine. Becca wanted to turn and give the guy who looked like he'd never seen a razor a piece of her mind. How dare he talk to her like she should have known what was his space? Razzie was the one who dared her, and she'd been stupid enough to fall for it. She glanced around the ballroom, but didn't see the girl. She tuned out Draken and his suave Casanova personality. The guy knew just what to say to a woman. Unfortunately for him, Becca was more aggravated over the other man than interested in talking to Draken. Something about the jerk stuck with her. His eyes. Behind all that anger and antisocial bullshit, she'd seen so much sadness. They reached Charlotte and her mates. Brackendaros proceeded to have a conversation with Draken. "Where did you go?" Charlotte asked. "I looked all over for you."
"Your sister had the misfortune of walking into Victor's lair."
Draken smiled.
"Thankfully, I heard him roaring at her and saved her from his clutches."
Becca had to stop herself from rolling her eyes at the way Draken made himself sound like a superhero. All he needed was a cape. She had shit handled and would have been fine without him. Some men like to be the center of attention. Charlotte gave Becca the look that said, "We can talk later." Becca took the glass of wine Charlotte handed her and sipped. She glanced at Draken from the corner of her eye. His incessant chatting had started to get on her nerves. The guy just didn't know when to shut up. She slowly backed away until Draken was so involved in his conversation with the wolves, he didn't realize she'd moved. Charlotte gave her a quick nod to indicate she was free to walk around. What Becca should do was get some air. The ballroom was packed with people, and she was starting to feel flustered. It had nothing to do with the annoying man in the library. Nope, nothing. She slid out a side door and took a path she swore would lead her to the gardens. She had a pretty good memory, so she marched down the quiet, rock-lined walkway without hesitating. "Stupid man. Did he really think I was there to bother him?" she grumbled, almost tripping on a rock. Her shoes changed from heels to flats with a single thought. She couldn't believe everything in this place had so much artificial intelligence. "Like he's that cute," she growled. She could barely see anything under the frazzled mop on his head. Other than the piercing, gold eyes, she had no idea what he looked like. "He looks like he needs a flea bath." She reached a circular area in the garden with a bench in the center. She sat, glanced at the dual moons, and sighed. So far, she'd loved coming to Aurora. She'd seen how happy her sister was with her 2 men. In the past, she never would have thought it was truly possible for 3 people to be in a happy relationship, but she'd seen otherwise with Charlotte. Her thoughts turned to herself. Men. She would find a good man. She was positive she would. There had to be a good one out there for her. Breath caught in her chest when she saw a massive dragon flying overhead, fire shooting out of his mouth. She gasped, her heart shooting to a galloping beat. The dragon wasn't going fast. She found herself mesmerized by the giant creature. She stood, following through the woods to catch up with it. A loud roar and bright bursts of light guided her along the dragon's way. She'd never seen a dragon in her life, not a real one. She started running, something she wouldn't be caught dead doing, trying not to lose the dragon. She slipped between trees, glancing up to follow the dragon. Nobody had mentioned dragon shifters. Maybe they just had dragons, not shifter dragons. There was an opening between the trees ahead. By the time she got to the area where she'd seen the dragon descending, he'd already landed. Light from both moons allowed her to see the amazing animal almost blending into the rocks lining the lake. She took a tentative step forward. Leaves crunched under her feet. The dragon raised his head. He'd been drinking from the lake. Big, golden eyes shined in the darkness. She should be scared shitless, but she wasn't. Instead, she found herself mesmerized. Her entire life, she'd been dreaming of dragons. The mythical creatures had taken over her home and her free time. She'd done so much research, looking into the myths, the legends. They all pointed to dragons not being real at any point in time. But this moment, watching that beautiful creature stare her down with curiosity, was beyond every one of her realities. "You're real," she whispered, taking another slow step toward the dragon. His scales shimmered under the moonlight. He didn't move. He watched her with intense, golden eyes. She bit her lip, unsure what to do. This was her biggest wish come true. A dragon in front of her. The dragon finally lowered his head to lay on one of his paws and huffed. She hoped that was his way of relaxing and allowing her to come closer, because that's exactly how she was taking it. "Hi," she said quietly, clearing her throat and gripping the sides of her gown. "I'm Becca." The dragon sniffed. "I guess you can't tell me your name, huh?" She smiled. "It's okay. You've got such beautiful golden eyes. I bet you make all the ladies crazy, don't you?" She swore there was surprise in the big animal's eyes. "I'm sorry. I let my mouth run away from me." She stopped a foot away from the dragon's massive head. Her fingers itched to run her hands over his scales. They shimmered brighter the closer she got. "Do you mind if I touch you?" The dragon didn't say anything, because it was a freaking dragon. What in the hell was wrong with her? She kept waiting for him to say something, like, "I'm gonna turn you into barbecue if you get too close." She raised a hand to his face and slowly caressed the area around his nose. He closed his eyes. She figured if he was anything like a puppy, he'd like being petted there. She grinned when the dragon let out a breath. "I bet you like your belly rubbed too, don't you?" He rumbled something, and she'd swear he was saying, "Yeah, right." His giant eyes snapped open. It was like staring deep into a pool of swirling liquid gold. He sniffed and opened his mouth. His big, spiky teeth were much closer to her face than she was comfortable with. "I hope you run free here." She sighed. "On my planet, you'd be hunted by idiots and the government." She slid her hand over his scales. They were soft, something she hadn't expected. Walking around his giant paw, she caressed her hand over his body until she reached his belly. The dragon eyed her with curiosity. His wings shimmered like the most delicate chiffon. "You're the most beautiful creature I've ever seen." She lowered her head to place it on his belly and listened to him breathe. His powerful lungs pushed her face with every breath. For a second, He tensed. Then he sunk lower into the ground, relaxing to her touch. She met his gaze and swore he saw into her soul. "Your eyes look so sad, and you look so lonely," she whispered. "I know how that feels too." There were no other words uttered. For a quiet moment, she listened to the dragon breathe. She swore they had a connection going. She guessed her love for dragons throughout her life allowed her to find a way to link with the creature without the need for words. "Becca!" Charlotte's voice sounded from the trees. She whirled around, taking a few steps in the direction of Charlotte's voice. "I'm right here." She glanced over her shoulder and saw the dragon take off in quick flight. "Wait, don't go!" It was too late. He shot through the air, flying so fast into the darkness of the night. If she would have blinked, she'd have missed it. Within seconds, Charlotte, her two mates, and Draken rushed from between the trees. They glanced around until they saw her. Her heart sank. The dragon was gone. For a magical moment, she'd felt so in tune with the creature. Now, she was lonely again. Victor wasn't sure what to think. He'd finally come to the realization he wanted her, the human, Becca. The way she touched his dragon, so carefully and without a single trace of fear or worry, had done him in. Even when she'd noticed his sharp teeth and realized he could have hurt or even killed her with a single claw swipe, she'd stayed. He glanced into the night. He refused to acknowledge his dragon calling for the human. Lust. That's what it was. He saw his reflection in the window and growled. This desire for her wasn't going anywhere. Razzie slammed his door open and raced inside. "Victor!" "Why did you send the human into my office?" he asked, his temper under control for the first time in weeks. He turned to face her and caught the flush of crimson on her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Vic. I didn't think you'd be in there. It was just a joke." She made a guilty face, shuffling foot to foot. "Somehow I think this was your way of getting me to interact with our guests," he said, reading more into his sister's features than she would have wanted. She stopped, her brows dipping low. "You should have been there with me, welcoming our guests and celebrating like Mother would have wanted." He nodded. "You're right. I should have been there." She opened and closed her mouth. "Really?" "Yes." He marched toward her, stopping inches from her. "I'm sorry I've been so distant. I will try to give you more of the support you need." She threw her arms around him, hugging him tight. "No, I'm sorry. I know you're going through a hard time, but I have faith we'll find your mate. Soon. I just know it." The image of Becca slipped through his mind. The dragon tried to convey something through their link, but Victor shut him down. He didn't want or need emotional attachments to anyone. His heart didn't seem to care what he wanted. The very thought of Becca's smile, her eyes, something warmed inside him. An emotion he wasn't really familiar with tugged at his heart. "I like Becca," Razzie said. "Do you mind if I invite her over for dinner tomorrow?" "I don't mind," he said, his body heating at the thought of having her near again. "Good," she sighed. "Draken invited himself and Aunt Laina as well. The last thing I want is to have to deal with those two alone." She pulled back and met his gaze. "He likes Becca. That should take his attention, keep him from annoying me." Victor's dragon roared to life at the mention of his cousin. Jealousy flittered through his veins, firing a new wave of rage. He bit back a growl and instead focused on the fact he'd have his little human back in his home. That was more to his liking. "Are you ever planning on shaving again, brother?" Razzie asked, yanking on a clump of his beard. "You're so handsome. When I can't see your face, I can't tell if you're happy or not."
"I'll think about it."
"Good. I'd hate for Becca to think this is how you look all the time." She gave him another hug and turned to go. She stopped at the door and glanced over her shoulder. "I don't know what happened, but I'm glad you're feeling better."
"11.
Victor picked up the tea he'd been given and waited for Jerry to show. He sat in the sunroom of the castle of the Lion King, Alex. Massive windows brought the outdoors inside. The view of the garden was better from this location than any other in the castle. He had to talk to Jerry. She'd promised to find him a mate on her return to Aurora from her last trip to get Becca. He'd given up on that and didn't want her to waste any more of her time searching. "Victor," Jerry said, walking into the room. "So good to see you." Victor stood and waited for the physical contact. Jerry had already told him she was a hugger. As predicted, she embraced him and patted his shoulder.
"It's good to see you too, Jerry,"
he said, sitting back and watching her fill a cup with tea. "I know I promised to help you sooner," she said, adding sugar to the tea. "Who knew I'd be going back and forth to Earth so many times?" He cleared his throat, not wanting to sound accusatory, since it wasn't her fault he hadn't found a mate within the time he needed.
"I came to ask you to disregard my request."
She frowned. "What do you mean? Forget about it?"
"My days are numbered."
He sighed.
"Your time is better spent finding someone else a mate."
She slammed her teacup on the table. "Are you seriously giving up on life, Victor?" He blinked, shocked at the change in the older woman. She'd gone from pleasant and sweet to angry and demanding. Her voice rose to a growl.
"Not necessarily giving up,"
he said, unable to stop the bitterness in his voice.
"Not like I have a choice."
Jerry stood, shook her head, and walked to a window before turning to face him. "Look at you!" Victor winced. He knew it had been a mistake coming to see her without cutting his hair or shaving.
"I've looked at myself."
"You hard-headed little fire-breather." She glared at him. "You think any woman will want a man who takes such little care in his grooming?" She shook her head. "I'm not saying a beard or long hair is bad, but this," she said, waving her hand up and down in front of him, "is a mess." He jumped to his feet, not liking the way she spoke.
"I'm not looking to impress anyone."
"Clearly," she snapped. "Forget about a mate for a second, Victor. Have you stopped feeling? Have you stopped desiring women? Lusting?" Becca's hips swaying in his office came to mind. Not fucking now. He so didn't need that while standing in front of Jerry getting torn a new asshole.
"My needs aren't important,"
he ground out. The fact that she made him question how Becca viewed him didn't sit well.
"I came to tell you to stop the search for a mate."
She lifted a brow. "Too late, you stubborn man-child. Although, any woman would have to be a saint to want to deal with you, looking like something the cat dragged in." She lifted her gaze to the ceiling and growled. "I swear to all that's holy, I need to add stipulations in my contracts. Must use common sense." Victor let the barb slide and instead turned to Jerry.
"I don't know what to tell you. Even if you found someone in time, I don't think I'm in the right frame of mind to be anyone's mate."
She pursed her lips and glowered.
You listen to me, you scaly little boy. If you mess up my match in any way, you'll regret it. I don't care what you want at this point. This is the misery inside you talking. It's the anger and frustration from what you perceive to be your upcoming demise. She folded her arms over her chest. Hear me and hear me well. You will be mated. You will have a long life. If at any point you start to think like this again, I will smack some sense into you until that brain of yours is back in normal working order. Got it? He did. He didn't want to give in to her manipulation, but the idea of Draken getting Becca because Victor looked like shit didn't sit well with him. It was time to go home and shave. He'd deal with whatever female Jerry had in mind later. Becca consumed his thoughts. Only Becca. 12. Becca glanced down the 1,000-foot drop with trepidation. She really needed to say no whenever someone dared her to do something. But it was like a disease. She wanted to prove she could do whatever was asked of her. "This isn't really fair, Charlotte," Becca yelled over her shoulder. "I don't know anything about these sheets." Charlotte's giggles sounded behind Becca. "You said you'd do it. No backing out now." Becca growled. She didn't know what the hell she was doing, but she knew Charlotte had gotten the thin sheet to wrap around Becca's arms and legs, meeting at her waist. She swore the sheet wasn't that big, but it had grown to fit around her torso and hung down her back like a homemade parachute. A very flimsy one. "Won't you feel bad if I die trying to fulfill a dare?" Becca asked. "I'm your favorite sister." "You're my only sister," Charlotte giggled. "You're not going to die, you wuss," Charlotte said. "Jump already." She prayed she wouldn't land like a pancake on the icy ground, and ran, jumping off the mountain. A scream lodged at the back of her throat. She didn't want to see herself die, but there was no closing her eyes. She dove, head first, going down fast and hard, and suddenly the thin sheet pulled back, reshaping into a thicker material and filling with air. She was now floating. She laughed uncontrollably. For a moment, she almost peed her pants from fear of dying. Adrenaline replaced fear, and wonder over the landscape had her glancing everywhere on her descent. A big purple dragon came her way. She forgot all about the landscape and watched the shiny, beautiful dragon, much smaller than the golden one she'd seen before. The purple lowered to a landing right where Becca was going. She landed on her feet, but her wobbly legs gave way, and she tumbled forward in the snow, rolling until her body bumped into the dragon's front claws, her hand resting on its foot. It was then she noticed the purple dragon had a bag strapped around one of its talons. Becca gasped, trying to catch her breath. "Oh my goodness, you're such a beauty," she squealed. The dragon lowered its head and sniffed at Becca, then licked her entire face and half her body in one swipe. Becca wiped at her face, then raised a hand and petted the animal lovingly. Excitement flooded her system. She couldn't believe she'd come this close to 2 dragons. "I can't believe you're purple. What a unique color," she gushed. The dragon moved back, and Becca watched, in shock, as the animal shrunk in size and its limbs reshaped. Scales withdrew and were eaten by flesh. The pretty purple dragon turned into Razzie. "Holy shit, girl!" Becca jumped to her feet and slapped a hand over her mouth. Razzie laughed and pulled an outfit out of her bag. She dressed quickly and then turned to Becca. "You didn't know there were dragon shifters?" Becca shook her head. "No, but I have to warn you, I love dragons. Will your family be upset if I kidnap you and take you to live with me? I promise to feed you." Razzie chuckled, sliding the bag over her shoulder and walking to Becca.
Victor would probably have something to say about that.
Yeah, Becca grumbled. I have no luck.
Razzie pulled out a pair of suede-like boots from her bag and slipped them on. I came to invite you to dinner at my home. Becca was struggling to pull the sheet off her back when suddenly the thing came loose. It freaked her out and excited her that the technology on this planet was much more advanced than on Earth. Dinner? She picked up the sheet and folded it, glancing up the mountain to the spot from where she'd dropped. Charlotte said she'd be right behind her, but so far there was no sign of her. Yes, Razzie said excitedly. You can stay over if you'd like.
I don't know. She frowned. Your brother was pretty pissed I was in his office.
Razzie twined and untwined her fingers together. I'm sorry about that. I honestly didn't think he'd be there. I wasn't looking to get you into trouble with him. He's usually a great guy.
Sadness filled her eyes.
Lately, it's been harder, because he's dealing with a lot of personal stuff.
Becca wanted to ask what in the world would make a man so rude. It's fine. I'm sure he's a great guy.
Razzie smiled wide. He is, and he doesn't normally look like that.
Becca frowned. Like what?
You know. Razzie scrunched her nose. That hair, all over.
You mean like Cousin It?
She laughed at Razzie's expression.
I guess he might be tired of shaving.
Razzie's eyes went wide. Oh no, not Victor. He's got impeccable grooming. It's why I'm so surprised at his lack of it lately. Becca wasn't one to judge a man by his appearance. She dated enough nice guys who looked like they were something the cat dragged in. It was Victor's attitude that she'd found distasteful. Whee! Charlotte yelled from far above Becca's head. Becca turned and watched her sister land on her feet without missing a beat. That's not fair. How did your legs not give? Charlotte chortled. I've done this enough times to have it down to a science. Razzie rushed over to give Charlotte a hug. Do you mind if I steal Becca for the night? Charlotte smiled at Razzie. I'll let you borrow my Becca whenever you want. There's a small fee for shipping and handling. Becca gasped. You'd trade me? Charlotte nodded shamelessly. Yep. Razzie's cook makes the best cream cake ever. I'm in love with it. And for another one of those yummy cakes, she can borrow you whenever she wants. Razzie laughed. I'll be sure to bring one when I pick up Becca later. She hugged Charlotte once more. Be sure to bring a change of clothes, she said to Becca. We're going to have a great time. Razzie was such a genuinely nice person. Becca didn't doubt for a second the girl would go out of her way to ensure she had fun. It was Victor who filled her thoughts. Even with all the hair covering his features, his eyes had spoken to her. She wasn't sure if he'd been genuinely rude or, maybe, he's struggling to deal with things. She didn't know what to think, but her heart told her not to judge him for his words. Lashing out at her, intruding into his private space, could be how he was handling things. Behind the anger and the dismissive tone, she'd seen pain and sadness, and hadn't been able to stop thinking about him since. Why was he so sad? What had angered him? Victor had caught her attention. It was the depth of emotion she saw behind his eyes. The same with the big dragon. Victor and the big dragon pulled different parts of her. The dragon reminded her of feeling alone when she'd been younger, even when her parents were in the same home. Victor's pain and sadness were like the emotions she tried to hide from the world. Acting like the feelings weren't there, she smiled and moved on, when inside she felt differently. Victor masked his pain with anger, Becca with smiles. 13. If Draken told her one more time how beautiful she looked, she'd hit him with her wine glass. She really would.
Manners be damned. Besides, she was on another planet. For all she knew, hitting the idiot over the head with a glass of wine meant she wanted to have sex with him. "I just adore your darker skin tone," Laiena said. Somehow the words didn't come across as praise. "It's so different." "Great. That's totally not a compliment," Lynn said with a frown that made her otherwise pretty face look hideous. "I agree with Mother," Draken said. "Your skin shines with a lovely glow." She stepped away from him. The dumbass kept rubbing against her. If he did it one more time, she'd cool his ardor with her wine.
"Sorry I was gone," Razzie huffed. "Dinner will be served shortly."
Becca hurried to Razzie and sighed. "I appreciate you inviting me to dinner. So far the appetizers have been delicious." Razzie wrapped an arm around Becca's side.
"Our cook is the best ever. She's been with our family for centuries."
Becca was dying to ask about Victor. Would he show up to dinner?
"Don't worry, I checked, and Victor told his assistant he wouldn't be coming down for dinner."
Razzie grinned.
"So no need to look worried anymore."
Damn it. The idea of Victor sitting in his room, alone, and hiding behind a wall of anger did something to her. She wanted to offer to invite him down, but knew it was probably for the best that he not show. Hanging out with Draken was probably not going to be fun for any of them. She really needed to stop thinking of Victor's eyes, and how sad he'd been behind the wall of animosity. She'd seen past the anger to something that was almost desperation. It killed her, wondering if she could ease his pain. Something about him tugged at her heart, and she hadn't been able to push him out of her mind. She stepped away to wash her hands before dinner. Razzie gave her directions to the nearest ladies' room, which bypassed Victor's office. She'd been tempted to stop and peek inside, but instead she kept going. On her way back, she stopped to glance out one of the large viewing windows at the dual moons. They were so beautiful. "Tired of the company already?" She didn't turn. There was no need. The sound of his deep, gravelly voice, without the bite of anger, was new. The heat from his body warmed her back. He placed a hand to either side of her, caging her against the window. "I wouldn't say I'm tired," she said. "At least I'm not getting yelled at today." "I apologize for my behavior yesterday. You didn't deserve my anger," he said, his voice moving closer to her ear. She licked her lips, still glancing at the garden. Today, his voice sent delicious, wicked thoughts through her brain. A hot shudder slid down her back. "I understand. We all have bad days," she said, clearing her throat. What? She understood. Was she high? She should be antisocial right back, but she couldn't. The mysterious man tempted her to find out more about him. "Thank you for agreeing to come to dinner with my sister," he said. "She's very excited to have you over." She licked her lips and nodded. "I like Razzie. She's a very sweet girl." "She's so innocent," he said, his breath hovering over her bare shoulder. "She doesn't understand. Not everyone is redeemable." She frowned and turned, her breath catching in her throat. Holy mother of hot men under a shit ton of hair. Talk about deceiving. You look different." His golden gaze raked over her face. This time, she saw the lust bright in his eyes. "I'm still the same person you saw yesterday." She nodded jerkily. Yeah, but now he was hot as fuck, with the face of a fallen angel. Hot damn. That shirt, opened at the top, showed off the muscles just below the material. "I'm sure you are, but now I can talk to a person instead of a cousinette." He frowned and then nodded.
Ah, yes, a movie reference. I believe I am taller than Cousin It.
She grinned. You are, but all that hair covering your face wasn't really giving me the option to call you anything else.
Indeed.
He leaned forward, his body brushing lightly over hers. The reaction was instantaneous. Her nipples pebbled tightly. She'd wanted him when he'd been covered in hair. Now that he had his blonde hair and short spikes and a smooth face showing his clean-shaven jaw, she had to fight her hormones for dominance. No way was she going to hump him in the middle of the hallway. For all she knew, that probably got her married to him on this planet. Are you, joining us for dinner? She asked, hoping he'd say yes. She could stare into his eyes all night while Draken talked nonsense.
Depends,
he said, his face lowering closer to hers. Her heart pounded hard in her chest. Need grew wings at her core, demanding she touch him, kiss him, go crazy and strip him. On what? She asked, her voice a breathy whisper.
On if you want me to.
"14." She glanced at his mouth, then back at his eyes. I don't think I should be the one making those decisions. I'm not sure how social you're feeling. He raised a hand to her face, sliding a finger down her jaw and cupping her neck.
I'm feeling social. Really social.
Her throat went dry. She leaned forward, her body taking a mind of its own. Possessive need filled his gaze, and a flash of triumph curled his lips into a grin right before his mouth crashed over hers. Why was she letting a guy who pissed her off kiss her? She knew why. From the moment she'd seen his eyes and been captivated by the sadness in them, she'd been caught. His lips pressed hard on hers, his tongue sliding over the seam of hers, using her inhale to dive into her mouth. Her body yearned for more of his touch. He glided his other hand around her waist, pressing his body, pushing himself up against her. She moaned into the kiss, taking more of his tongue into her mouth, loving the way he dominated the kiss, how every caress felt like he was touching her from head to toe. He took her lips like a man starved, and it felt so fucking perfect, so wonderful to have him owning her body like she belonged to him. Breath struggled in and out of her lungs. "Becca?" Razzie called from down the hall. "We're going to have dinner soon." She pulled back from the kiss, leaving them both panting for more. Her gaze ran down to his shirt, where she had clumps of the material in her grip.
Becca,
he groaned, pressing his erection on her body.
I'm ready to eat, but it's not food I'm after.
Well, damn. Food is overrated, said the woman who loved to eat. Right at that moment, she'd give up every meal for more alone time with Victor.
I want you, Becca,
he groaned, his hand holding her face captive.
I want to spread your beautiful legs and feast on you for hours.
She had to take a step back and process what he was saying. I don't know what brought on this change of heart after yesterday's rude outburst. She gulped. But we really need to get to the dining room. No way in hell was she acting like his dismissive attitude hadn't happened. Okay, so maybe she'd gotten a little carried away by her hormones a few minutes ago, but she was in control again. Mostly. He offered her his arm, but she worried touching him would just make her vulnerable again. She shook her head and slid from between him and the window. She started walking, feeling the heat of his gaze burning her back. Everyone waited by the large dining room table to take their seats. She met Razzie's wide-eyed gaze and smiled. "Look who I found on my way back from the bathroom." Razzie blinked, glancing back and forth between the two. She knew there was no smeared lipstick to worry about, but damn, the way Razzie looked worried her. Was it obvious what they'd been doing? She glanced over her shoulder at Victor and almost drooled. His face, much clearer in the dining room light, was even more breathtaking than at first sight. He had the chiseled features with a stubborn chin and piercing gold eyes, but it was his mouth that made her belly clench. His lips, set into that seductive smile, warmed her blood to a low boil. "You're back," Draken said, rushing toward Becca, only to stop dead when he got a good look at Victor. "Victor, I didn't expect you for dinner." Becca bit her lip to stop herself from saying anything. She knew Draken's accusatory tone had sent the tension rising in the room. "Do I need an invitation to have dinner in my own home?" Victor snapped. Laina cleared her throat, raising a brow high. "Of course not, Victor. Dre doesn't mean anything by that. We didn't expect you, is all." Becca saw Razzie continue to stare at them, like they'd waltzed into the dining room naked. "Razzie, should we sit?" Razzie nodded and glanced at Victor. "Vic, could you show Becca to her seat?" "My pleasure," he said, his voice so close it raised goosebumps over her skin. He placed a hand on her waist and guided her to one end of the dining table. He pulled a chair for her and helped her sit. Victor stood beside her until Draken pulled Razzie's chair at the head of the table before helping his mother sit. Once all were seated, with Victor beside Becca, dinner appeared to be starting on a good note. Until Victor placed a hand on her leg. Becca cleared her throat and jerked her face sideways to stare into his dancing, golden eyes. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "I'd be very careful what you say, beautiful." He leaned into her side. "You wouldn't want to embarrass Razzie and ruin her special dinner. This table is full of very sensitive ears, and no matter how low you say things, they can hear you." He leaned even closer. "And that goes for any noises you make." "15. She had a quiet stare-off with him, watching his features go from slightly bored to intently seductive. A bowl of dark soup was placed in front of each of them, and Draken asked Razzie a question Becca missed due to the hand on her lap. Victor slid his hand higher up her leg, toward her inner thigh. The pants she'd worn appeared to be perfect for whatever he had in mind. The stupid smart material created slits, giving his hand access to her bare skin. She gasped and picked up her wine, taking a big gulp to stop herself from moaning at the little circles he made on her inner thigh. A hot shudder slid over her bare arms, up to the back of her neck. She'd worn a soft, strapless top to match the pants, and now she wished she'd worn a sweater. Victor grinned. "Thirsty, darling?" That bastard. He wanted to play games with her after the way he treated her the day before. She didn't appreciate it. The closer he got to her crotch, the less she could look away from him. "What do you think, Becca?" Razzie asked. She glared at Victor and then met Razzie's gaze, telling her with her eyes she had no idea what they were talking about. "Should I cut my hair? Laina says yes," Razzie added, helping her get caught up with the conversation. "I love yours. It's short, but not too short, so it's still sassy." Victor glided his fingers up by the edge of Becca's underwear. She inhaled sharply. "I say go for whatever you like, but I think your hair long looks beautiful. I would normally have mine longer, too." She was given a second's reprieve when Victor raised his hand to her hair and grabbed a curl from the high ponytail she'd done.
Sounds like there is a story behind the short hair.
Razzie nodded. I was about to say the same. Why did you cut it? Damn it. She didn't really want to talk about that episode, but now she had everyone at the table staring at her with curiosity. It was a dare, she said. You were dare to cut your hair? Lena asked. I wish, she said with an embarrassed laugh. No, I was dared to get extensions in multiple colors for a Halloween costume last year. The extensions knotted so badly in my hair, they needed to be cut out. That meant my hair had to be cut. It was a really bad idea.
What kind of costume would require you to get extensions like that?
Draken asked. It wasn't really the costume itself that did it, but I don't think the entire idea helped.
What did you dress up as?
Victor asked, laughter clear in his voice. Cousin It. Who? Lena asked. It was hard to hear over Victor's booming chuckles. It's a movie character from Earth. Razzie grinned. I've made Victor watch The Addams Family many times. Becca smiled at Razzie. My goal in life is to find a man who will love me like Gomez loves Morticia. Razzie sighed. Yeah, I agree. Those two have a love nobody can beat. You should aspire for more than a copy of some silly movie relationship, Lena said, her voice chastising. Becca opened her mouth to reply, but shut it quickly at the feel of Victor's hand in her crotch. In her crotch. He'd gone straight for the goodies, slipped his hand under the slit of her pants, and pushed aside her panties. Victor! She squealed, ignoring her new plate of food and picking up the wine again.
Yes, darling.
What? Where do your people get such unusual eye colors? She didn't know what the hell she was saying anymore. Words popped out of her mouth without warning. Our eye colors are dependent on our dragons. Razzie supplied the answer. So you're all dragons? Becca asked, glancing around the table until her gaze lingered on Victor.
Each and every one.
He grinned. Becca sucked another gulp of wine and did the unimaginable. She widened her legs on her seat, making it easier for him to touch her. Well, hell, if he was going to do this, she might as well enjoy it. Victor picked up his wine and sipped. She loved watching him lick his lips after a drink. She wanted to be the one to suck the wine off his mouth. Dinner had never been this enticing in her life. "16. Victor watched the play of emotions cross Becca's features. Horror, shock, and pleasure. The last appeared to be her body finally giving in to his ministrations. He'd been consumed with being around Becca since he'd had words with her in his office. The dinner had given him the opening to sit with her, to touch her. After the episode in the hallway, he'd wondered if maybe she was his mate. Could she be? He didn't feel the instant connection from his animal with a mate like he knew he would. It was disheartening, but he had his answer. She wasn't the one. The man in him wanted her. Oh, so fucking bad. That would have to be enough. He'd purposely sat so close to her and at an angle so that it wasn't noticeable he was touching her. Fuck how he wanted her. She pushed closer to his fingers, widening her legs so he could reach the center of her heat. She was slick, hot, and ready. Another smile grew on his lips. At the rate she drank the wine, he'd have to carry her to bed. Her skin had to be the softest he'd ever touched, smooth like the finest silk produced in the Neater caves. She did another quick intake of breath, and his erection pressed at the fly of his pants. He'd give up the few weeks he had left of life to get a taste of how good she'd feel wrapped around his cock.
"Becca, would you like to join for the first flight of the season?"
Draken asked. Victor snapped his gaze to her face. Her cheeks were flushed, and she was breathing a hint heavier than before. First flight meant Draken had ideas for Becca, something Victor didn't appreciate. He couldn't give her much, but he wanted her for himself, even if it was only for a short time.
"I'm sorry,"
Becca said, sipping on her wine again. When she put the glass down, Victor saw her hand shake on its descent down to her lap.
"What is a first flight?"
So far, she hadn't interfered with his touching her. Her hand landed on top of his. He wondered if she'd finally pull him off her and stop his slow caresses around her clit. Instead, she pressed his fingers into her pussy. The scent of her arousal curled around them like a fog. Oh, how he wanted her. She was the perfect woman, but with the problems with his dragon, he knew it was bad timing for a relationship, especially with what he knew his outcome would be soon. That didn't stop his heart from developing feelings he didn't share with the dragon, feelings he knew wouldn't solve his problems. It wouldn't matter if he fell in love with Becca. His dragon was the one who needed a mate. With the link between them growing weaker by the day, he knew that was going to be impossible to find.
"First flight is when we change into our dragons, giving them control, and flying over Dragos land to see the season as it changes over our land."
Razi's firm shake of the head made Victor finally pull his hand from between Becca's legs. His sister's annoyed glare told him she knew what he'd been up to. Victor didn't normally give a shit, but he didn't want Razi's dinner to go badly.
She cleared her throat. "Sure, why not? I bet it will be fun."
Victor wanted to growl. He didn't like the idea of Becca being held in Draken's grasp, or anyone else's for that matter. Once he decided to behave, the rest of the meal became a lot more interactive, with a lot less heavy breathing. Victor had just changed from his dinner outfit when a loud knock sounded at his door. He'd always been able to tell when Razi was angry. She had the same 3 knocks in rapid succession, indicating her short patience.
"Come in, Razi."
She threw the door open and rushed inside, slamming it closed behind her.
"What were you doing tonight, Victor?"
she demanded.
"Becca came here as my guest, and you were sitting there manhandling her like a pervert."
He would have laughed at her outrage if she didn't sound so upset.
"I'm sorry, Razi. I lost control of myself."
He lied. He knew exactly what he was doing. He wanted to touch Becca, wanted her to spend the entire dinner thinking of his hand on her pussy. She started pacing his room, her long hair flying around behind her.
"I have never seen you so intent on a female."
She stopped and looked at him.
"You obviously want her."
He nodded, not willing to deny it.
"So what the hell are you doing in here?"
Her words pulled a frown to his face.
"What?"
She smiled.
"You want her. She's a wonderful woman. Why aren't you in her room? Seducing her?"
The last thing he'd expected was for his sister to encourage his pursuit of Becca, especially knowing he couldn't give any female forever at this point.
"I can't give her what most women want, Razi. I don't have the time for a relationship with many years together. This would be one night."
Razi ran over to him, threw her arms around his neck, and hugged him.
"You have one life, brother."
He wasn't sure what to say, and didn't get a chance to voice his confusion. She let go of him and rushed out of his room with the same speed she'd arrived with. Victor knew his desire for Becca would be short-lived. His dragon had shut down most emotional connections and the ability to form bonds due to his limited time left. It was surprising he found his desire for Becca to be so strong that it broke through some of the walls the animal erected in his heart. His desire for her burned in his veins like the hottest lava. He shouldn't give in. Lusting after a woman was dangerous when he had so little to offer. But he wouldn't stay away. He couldn't wait any longer. He'd have Becca. Tonight. Now. 17. Becca had never been so glad to strip out of her clothes and get ready for a bath. Victor and Razzie might be dragon shifters, but they lived in one of the most comfortable castles she'd ever imagined. Top-of-the-line technology that adjusted to their guests' comfort filled every room. One of the things she'd come to love in Alex's castle was the mood sensors in the bedrooms. Her room in Victor's castle was different. Not only was it larger, but it had the bathroom of her dreams. She'd been dying to try out the giant whirlpool tub from the moment she arrived. She'd had one of the maids help set it up for her with scented oils. Her sore muscles, from hiking and walking in larger doses than usual, begged for a soak. She took off her robe and sat in the steaming tub slowly. Neon lights lit the bottom of the jacuzzi. The front of the tub had a glass wall which showed off her naked body. She didn't really care, since she was alone in the room. Water lapped around her body, covering her up to her tits. Jets massaged her back, arms, legs, and ass. She wiggled around and gasped when one of the jets pumped water right between her legs. Oh my, that had serious potential. Holding on to the 2 handbars, she leaned back. She rocked her hips over the stream of water, pushing hard against her pussy, until it was like a giant wave vibrating over her clit. Holy fuck, that felt good. A knock sounded at her bedroom door. She'd asked the maid for tea to help her sleep. With the bathroom door closed, she didn't worry about being caught using the tub like a giant sex toy. Now she could get her freak on with the water jets. "Come in," she yelled. "Leave it on the table. I can serve myself. Thank you so much. Have a good night." The bedroom door opened and closed, and she returned to her massaging jets. She shut her eyes, giving in to the tingling water pushing at her clit. A slow heat started at the pit of her belly. She wasn't sure why or what caused it, but instinct told her to open her eyes. Victor stood by the bathroom wall, leaning back, watching her quietly. She should be alarmed he'd come into her space and hadn't said anything, but she wasn't. Instead, seeing him watching her turned her on even more. "What are you doing here?" she breathed, pushing her body under the water. "I came for you," he said. His gaze raked over her face and down to her chest. Her nipples peeked from the water with the arch of her back. "You look even more beautiful now than you did at dinner." She licked her lips, wishing she didn't have a jet of water pumping at her pussy, but at the same time, not moving away. "How's that possible?" "At dinner, I saw you fighting the need to moan and pant," he said, taking a step toward the tub. He sat at the edge. His soft pants and shirt looked like a pair of casual pajamas and not an actual outfit to go out in. "Now I can watch your reactions. There's no need to hide them any longer." She gasped when the water massaged the area of her pussy that pushed her toward release. "That is such a beautiful sight," he said, his voice low and thick. "Your face, your breathing, your tits lifting out of the water and offering themselves to me is exactly what I want." She gripped the bars, wiggling her hips and sloshing water. He leaned down, taking her lips with his and dipping his hands into the water to caress her body. He cupped her breast, squeezing her nipple and flicking a thumb over it. Her mewl of need sounded loud between their kiss. He continued south, caressing her belly and large thighs before massaging her clit with 2 fingers. Her body bucked, pleasure shooting through her so hard and fast she shook with the intensity. She'd never come so quickly from a man touching her. Never. He'd done a few presses on her clit and drawn circles around her sensitive nub, and that's all it took. What the hell was wrong with her body? A scream lodged at the back of her throat. His tongue pushed in and out of her mouth, showing her he was in control. He curled his tongue over hers, sliding around her mouth like he owned her. She bit his lip and sucked it hard as she rode the pleasure wave. He rumbled a low growl. It made her desperate, hungry for him. She let go of the bars and grabbed his shirt, yanking and tugging to get it off him. Lust clouded her mind. There is nothing but him, wanting him, tasting him, having him. The sound of material tearing excited her. She knew he'd done it and loved that he joined in her desperation. Soon he was in the water, naked, sliding his body over hers. The bar of his cock pressed between her legs. Her pussy throbbed with desire. He was big and hard, pushing at her entrance, ready to take her. He pulled back from their kiss to stare deep into her eyes. I don't need water to know you're wet for me. 18. She gulped down a breath of air and nodded. I'm not just wet. I'm ready. I want you in me, fucking me. She didn't care how easy she sounded at the moment. All her thoughts had moved to her pussy and the cock rubbing her entrance. He lifted and pulled her body up with him. The jets continued beating around them. He sat on one of the edges of the jacuzzi and glanced down at her face. Come here, beautiful. Bring me your body. His rumbling tone shot shivers down her spine. There was a distinct possibility that if he continued talking, she'd come from listening to him. That could be used as serious advertisement for the planet. Shifters so hot, they make you come with words. The giant tub could fit 3 people easily. Shiny white, with silver metal jets, it was the ultimate jacuzzi she'd ever been in. Like everything else in the room, the tub also had artificial intelligence. A small bench seat slowly pulled from one of the sides, big enough for him to sit on. She straddled him, lowering her body to his slowly. In the past, this would be the point she'd wonder if her bigger body was something her partner found lacking. With her larger belly rolls, hips, and arms, it was always a possibility. With Victor, there was none of that. I can tell something's on your mind, he said, guiding her body down to his with his large hands holding her waist. Whatever it is, forget it. We aren't stopping, and I'm not letting you go. He met her gaze with an amount of desire she'd never seen in a man's eyes. Tonight, you're mine. You belong to me. He sucked her nipple into his mouth, nipping the tiny bud with his teeth. A low moan escaped her throat. He pressed her down until his cock was pushing at her entrance again. Oh, God, Victor, she groaned. He released her tit. His jaw tightened, and he pulled her onto his dick. The broad head of his cock penetrated her, sliding into her body, stretching her muscles taut. Fuck, baby, you were so damn hot and slick, he grunted. Once she was fully seated with him, deep and thick inside her, she took a choppy breath. Wow! A slow grin curled around his lips.
Not yet, darling. Soon.
He grabbed handfuls of her ass cheeks and urged her to rock on his cock.
Yes,
he groaned when she wiggled in a way that let him inch farther into her. He slid a hand up her back while holding her close to him with the other on her ass.
I love your body, Becca.
She thought he was being nice. It was a really great thing to hear in the middle of sex, but a quick glance at his face told her he wasn't just saying that. Another wiggle, and her body tightened unexpectedly. She gasped and sank her nails into the back of his neck, clinging to him.
You really do, don't you?
She asked. He leaned forward, kissing her lips and jaw, sucking his way down to her throat.
Yes, I fucking adore every single inch of you. Your body, your curves drive me crazy. Every dip, every sexy part. I want to bite and brand you. I want to stamp my dragon's mark on you and let the world know you're mine,
he said, lifting her and slamming her down.
Oh, God!
Her pussy contracted around his dick. His fingers bit into her hips, dropping her on his cock.
Fuck, you feel good. So fucking good and soft,
he said.
Every time I slide deep in your pussy, I feel surrounded by wet velvet.
An inferno of need rocked her to the core. She gasped with every glide. Her body warmed, melting from the inside. She'd had enough sex in her life to recognize good sex. This wasn't anywhere near good. It was wholly fuck out of this world. Tension curled around her spine, stopping her movements and turning her smooth rise and fall into jerky motions. Victor continued lifting and impaling her with faster speed. She bit her lip, digging her nails harshly into her shoulders, positive she'd drawn blood. His hands on her hips felt hot, hotter than before. His cock grew thicker inside her. She was close, so close to her release. She shut her eyes and let her body focus on feeling.
That's it,
he whispered, his tongue swiping at her mouth as she took tiny puffs of air.
Go over. Let me feel you come.
With a final slam, she ground her pussy into his pelvis, and she came. Her orgasm tore through her like a Category 5 hurricane. Pleasure skated over her system, leaving her dazed, confused, and without any energy. Her muscles liquefied, and she forgot how to speak and breathe. Her pussy grasped at his cock.
Oh, fuck. Yes, you feel so good,
he grunted, gripping her hips and rocking her harder on his dick.
So wet and tight.
Shudders racked her core. His body tensed. White-hot need exploded in her belly. She needed him to come. Now, to fill her with his cum and soothe the aching fire in her. As if he'd read her mind, he plunged deeply into her one final time and held still.
I wish I could have you forever,
he growled. His cock pulsed inside her, shooting streams of warm semen into her channel. She couldn't help herself. She licked up his neck, tasting him. Perspiration and water turned their bodies slick. He didn't pull out of her. They stayed plastered together, neither moving. She couldn't think straight. Catching their breaths appeared to be a major job at the moment. She laid her head on his shoulder and shut her eyes. He slid his hand up and down her back, caressing her body, not once bypassing her chubby rolls. A slow grin spread over her lips. In the past, men had rejected Becca because of her weight. She was a big girl with big curves, and that was fine with her, not so much with the male population on Earth. This wasn't necessarily the body she'd wanted, but it was what she had, so she took care of it. Unfortunately, weight liked her body, and it was damn hard to get rid of it. even with the active lifestyle she led. So she'd learned self-acceptance and self-love. It took a long time to realize people didn't see the real her without focusing on her body. She knew she was a good person, a woman filled with positive thoughts and the firm belief that she'd eventually find her own happily ever after, just like Charlotte. With Victor holding her the way he was, she wondered if she finally had. "19. Becca," Victor said, his voice breaking through her dreams. She opened her eyes and met his gaze. A slow grin appeared on his face. "I want to show you something." She debated tossing a pillow at him or getting out of bed. When she took too long to answer, he picked her up as she was. She was naked and all wrapped up in the blanket they'd been sleeping in. "What are you doing?" she gasped, struggling to get her arms out of the blanket to throw them around his neck. "I said I wanted to show you something, and you look like you'll kill me for 30 more minutes of sleep," he said. He lifted her into his arms and proceeded to carry her out of the room. "Victor!" She pushed her hair away from her face and knew it was a total mess. "You do realize I'm naked under this thing, right?" He stopped mid-stride and pressed his lips to her lips. "I wouldn't want you any other way." Her heart warmed with the softness she saw in his eyes. For a moment, there were no walls in his golden depths, only caring and concern. He marched upstairs, not once out of breath. "Victor, I can walk." She ran her nails through the back of his hair, gliding her fingers between his short locks. "I'm too heavy. I'm telling you, you're going to hurt yourself." "No, you can't walk, because I want to carry you." He winked and lifted the corner of his lips in a sexy grin. "You're so tiny. I don't understand why you keep complaining about your weight." She didn't know what to say. No way was she going to complain over a man finally finding her small and enjoying her curves. She'd have to be stupid. "You make a good point." "We're almost there," he said, pushing a door open to the top of one of the castle's towers. There was a sofa and nothing else up there. He sat down on the sofa and placed her on his lap, cuddling her to his chest. "It's still nighttime," she said, turning sideways to look into his eyes. "Did you want to talk about something?" A cool breeze rushed through the trees, rattling branches and making her press her body into his. He hugged her tighter, rubbing his arms up and down hers. "I want to show you something." He glanced up at the sky and sighed. "In a few minutes." "Razzie's a dragon," she said, voicing the first thing that came to mind. "She is." He laughed. "We are the Dragos, dragon shifters." She nodded. "So you're a dragon too?" "I am." She bit her lip, wanting to ask more about that, but deciding against it. She wondered how he looked as a dragon. Was he like the big golden one she'd seen? Victor was clearly a golden dragon, from what they'd said about eye color. Razzie's eyes were purple. His were gold, and Draken's were red. It still weirded her out to think of his red eyes. It was so strange. She nodded and glanced up too. "Wow, you have the most amazing night sky," she gasped. "The stars are really close. I feel like I can reach up and grab them." He laughed. "Those are our neighboring planets. They keep to themselves, much like we do." One particular star had a blue glow that made it appear like a nightlight. "That's a really pretty one." "That's Kairos. They're a lot like us, but they don't shift. They're more of a warrior race." She leaned her head into his shoulder. This is so surreal. I would have never thought I'd ever be on a planet full of shifters. She kissed his neck, with such a sexy one holding on to me.
Why is that so hard? I've never been to Earth, but I find that from what Bella and Charlotte have said, we have things in common.
She shook her head. Very little. Your planet is so clean, so beautiful and lush. On Earth, there's tons of garbage, and humans don't know how to live without a million gadgets.
You don't like gadgets?
She shrugged. I'm happy with a good book. Give me an e-reader or a paperback, and I can be easily entertained.
What types of books do you like to read?
He appeared genuinely interested, so she didn't feel bad answering honestly. I like horror. I like stuff that scares me. He started laughing, the loud chuckle making her bounce on his lap. What's so funny?
I never would have taken you for someone who likes horror, but now that I think about it, I can see it.
She raised her brows and stared at his face. You can? He nodded.
I saw the murderous intent in your eyes the night of the ball.
She tapped him on the shoulder in a mock slap. You're bad. What about you? What do you like to do when you're not yelling at women for entering your lair? His eyes shined in the moonlight.
I take care of Dragos land. It was my father's job before me, and will be Razie's job after.
She caressed the side of his scruffy face. She didn't know why, but the feel of the harsh little hairs poking out of his jaw turned her on more than his clean-shaven look did. You must miss your parents. He held her hand to his cheek.
I do. My dad was a great man, loved by everyone. When Breck's father killed him, I felt like my heart was being torn out.
Her chest compressed with sadness. It had to be awful to witness something like that. I'm sorry. Your land is beautiful, though. You've done a great job, with Razie as well. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her palm.
You're so generous, giving me credit for something my mother was responsible for.
She smiled. Razie told me she was a little kid when things took place, and you had to take control of everything. Don't act like I'm mistaken.
Will you miss anything from Earth if you stay here?
She glanced up at the sky, trying to control how fast her heart decided to beat when she heard that question. She didn't know if he was saying something about them. Did he mean he wanted her to stay with him? God, she hoped so. He made her feel things, so many things, all wonderful and exciting. No. She met his gaze. I'd just as easily give up everything I had there if I found happiness here.
Razie mentioned you have a hard time with dares.
She laughed. Yes, I can't seem to stop myself from wanting to take each one and make it a reality.
What's the silliest thing you've done on a dare?
He adjusted her so she could lean her head back on his shoulder. I wore a tutu for a whole day while running errands. She laughed at the memory. I had so many weird looks. People asking me if I had a caretaker or if I knew what I was wearing. He chuckled.
Sounds like a very interesting day.
Hey, you can't tell me you've never done something silly, she said. Start spilling. He shook his head, thrusting his fingers into her hair. He pushed the strands the wind had shoved over her face back behind her ear.
I'm too busy to do anything silly.
She raised her brows and blew a raspberry. Come on. I bet you have a naughty streak in you. Heat flared in his gaze.
Oh, believe me, beautiful. I definitely have a naughty streak. I can show it to you when we get back to my bed.
She inhaled a sharp breath at the way his features turned feral. Whoa, She saw the desire on his face. "I will definitely take you up on that, but you have to tell me something silly. Come on, open up," she whispered. "Give me your deep, dark secrets." He laughed and kissed her cheek. "You don't see it, but you have such an impish smile." "You're stalling." "All right, okay." He frowned in thought. "When I was a kid, Breck and I caught my father sleeping. My mother had given Razzie, who was a baby at the time, hair bows and things to play with her toys." "Uh-oh." He nodded. "We put bows in my father's hair while he slept. When he woke, he chased us around the house until he caught us. Then he carried each of us on his shoulders and dumped us in the river." She laughed, her eyes tearing from the image of him and Breck as little kids, soaking wet. "I bet that was fun." "Not really." He laughed. "It was the middle of a bad winter. We were freezing when we got out. But my father had our blankets at hand, and we were warm within a few seconds. Still, it taught us not to mess with him when he was asleep." "How did you two not freeze?" She gasped. "We're shifters. Our bodies are used to everything on this planet from a young age. Being cold was only a mild inconvenience. The chase was the fun part." He smiled wistfully. "I had a lot of fun back then." "Thank you for sharing that memory with me." He glanced ahead and smiled. "Look, this is what I brought you here for." She turned her face and squinted. "What?" "That opening straight ahead, between the trees." He lifted a hand and pointed where he wanted her to look. She glanced at the area. A bright orange light appeared on the horizon. It moved up slowly, then a second, bigger yellow brightness shone from its right. She watched them both rise next to each other, almost as if holding hands. "Wow." "It's one of the things I like to watch. When you see them in the morning, they appear to start out together and rise farther and farther apart. In the evenings, they reunite again." She sighed and leaned her head against his shoulder. Another reason to love the sons of Aurora. Even they were romantic. Once they were rising and separating, Victor hugged her and kissed her cheek. "Come on, I'll take you back to bed so you can continue your sleep." Sleeping would be that much better after her time with him. Maybe things were headed in the direction she hoped. Maybe he'd been looking for more, too. She hoped so, because her feelings were off the charts for the dragon. "20. Becca woke with a smile. She stretched on her bed and sighed, letting her body go lax. The scent of coffee woke her up. Coffee? She jerked her eyes open and glanced around. Light filled her room. Unlike the previous night, when the room provided dark colors to go with her long hours of sex with Victor, the room was now a pale yellow. Everything was bright and cheerful inside it, exactly the way she felt. She hopped out of bed, ignoring her naked state, and winced. Damn, that dragon had some serious stamina. Her back hurt, and she could barely walk. She shuffled to the table, where she saw what looked like a coffee carafe with mugs waiting. Someone had been nice enough to bring her coffee. Thank God. She lifted a folded piece of paper. "It isn't what you call coffee, but we've been told it smells and tastes like it. I hope you enjoy it." She grinned. A man who fucked her stupid and gave her coffee? All she needed was bacon, and he'd be a keeper. She poured the not coffee into a mug and sniffed it. Definitely smelled like coffee, but with more hints of cinnamon than she was used to. She added what smelled and looked like milk and sugar. Then she sat to sip it with a sigh. Someone knocked at her door, and she glanced down at herself. Shit, she was having coffee naked. Not something she normally cared about, but clearly whoever was at the door might have reservations about seeing her nude in her jiggly glory. She threw on a robe and opened the door to a bright-eyed Razzie.
"Hi!"
Razzie smiled.
"Can I come in?"
Becca tried and failed to stop herself from grinning ear to ear. It was silly, yes, but she was excited about the time she spent with Victor. She wanted more, to see where this could go.
"Come on in."
Razzie sat on a chair by the table.
"I'm not sure if this is appropriate or proper, but I wanted to thank you."
She frowned. What for?
"For being here."
She stood and paced. Becca got the impression Razzie liked to do that when thinking.
"I hadn't been able to get Vic out of that angry mood he's been in."
She stopped and glanced at Becca.
"Suddenly, you and he have words, and now he has shaved, cut his hair, and is looking like himself again."
Becca raised her brows. She highly doubted that she was the reason Victor had done all those things. It looked more like he was going through something. But if she did have an impact on his life, to that extent, she was glad to help.
"I don't know what to say," Becca mumbled.
"Don't say anything,"
Razzie sighed.
"I had to thank you and warn you. I don't want your feelings hurt."
Becca sat. Warn me about what?
"Vic, he's..."
Razzie's pale face turned crimson with embarrassment.
"He's not interested in being in a relationship. I don't know how far things got last night, and if you're anything like me, you're possibly wondering where this is going."
She bit her lip.
"It's not going anywhere. He was clear about that. He wants you, but he's not looking for long-term."
Becca froze in place. She felt as if someone had dumped a bucket of ice water on her. She met Razzie's sad gaze and smiled over her shock. "I'm not getting any ideas. One night of sex doesn't mean we're getting married or anything." Razzie shifted from foot to foot.
"I don't know how to make this better."
She stood and shook her head. "Don't worry, I'm fine. Do you mind giving me some time alone? I want to get dressed and ready to head back to Charlotte's place."
Razzie nodded. "Of course, I can go. Are you sure you don't prefer for me to stay and talk to you?"
Hell no. She didn't want the poor girl making excuses for Victor. Looked like there were players all over the universe. "I'm fine. I just need to shower and change." Once Razzie was gone, she gulped down the coffee and slammed the bathroom door closed. She showered quickly and tried not to think how stupid she felt. She'd actually done something with Victor she hadn't done before. She gave herself ideas about the future, thoughts of a relationship, and possible long-term commitment. Yeah, right. No matter what planet she was on, a one-night stand was still a one-night stand. She rushed to dress and pack her overnight bag. The longer she stayed, the angrier she got. Not with Victor. He hadn't made any promises. She was angry with herself for foolishly thinking she'd have the same luck as Bella and Charlotte, and that being on Aurora would mean she'd find a great shifter for herself, too. Bullshit. "21. Becca lifted the bow and arrow and took aim. Luckily, she had done this before and wouldn't look like a total idiot trying to best her new brother-in-law. She shot the arrow, missing the target by 3 trees. Fucking hell. She'd never shot that badly. She growled and glared at the bow. The urge to throw it on the ground and stomp on it hit her fast and hard.
"Are you okay, Becca?"
Eros asked. She turned to face him, having forgotten for a second he was there, and pasted a fake smile over her face. "Yes." He frowned. Has Charlotte spoken to you much about shifters? Becca ground her teeth and shook her head. We're able to sniff lies, he said, his eyes filled with compassion. I can tell you're not okay. She did growl at that point. I'm sorry. I should have been more adult about this, but I can't help being angry. He nodded, but she knew she made no sense. Victor? How he figured that out from her words, she had no clue. He didn't say he wanted a relationship, so why did I go and start planning one? That's not me. Eros put his bow down and walked toward her. Come on, he said, walking with her to a picnic blanket they'd set out. Even though the ice mountains were cold, he'd taken her to a much warmer area for target practice. They sat, and for a moment he said nothing. She hoped he didn't feel uncomfortable with her need to vent. I'm sorry, she started. No. He shook his head and sighed. Don't apologize for what you're feeling. There are a lot of things I can't tell you about Victor, but the one I can tell you is that he's a good guy. She snorted. A good guy who won't say no to a booty call. He frowned. Victor is going through a difficult time right now. He's having problems with his dragon and coming to terms with personal issues. You don't have to defend him, she said flatly. He didn't do anything wrong. Hell, more like everything right. He'd given her more orgasms than she was used to, and it had fucked with her head. Perhaps you should speak to him, Eros suggested. I think there are things only he can explain to you. She quickly rejected the idea. No, if he wanted to talk, then he would have come over by now. She heard the flapping of wings and glanced up. Sure enough, there was that big, golden dragon she'd spoken to at the castle. They both stood to get a closer view of the creature. She watched the giant beast land with a thump, a bundle of something wrapped around his talon. Suddenly, it started to shrink, scales receded, and turned to flesh. She should have known. Victor. Who else could have had those intense, golden eyes to match the dragon? Fuck. She turned to face Eros, but found herself alone. Great. Now he'd left her to deal with Victor on her own. The last thing she wanted was for him to realize she'd gotten ideas about the two of them. Not when he was clearly not interested in her that way. Becca. Listen. She looked away. We don't need to talk about what happened. She turned to put some distance between her and him. Stop, he yelled. She whirled around and glared at him. Don't come ordering me around. I've been patient with your attitude and shit, so don't yell at me. He stopped short and took a deep breath. I'm sorry. I didn't want you to walk away without listening to me. You mean there's more than what Razzie told me about you not wanting a relationship? Just one night use of my body? She folded her arms over her chest. There's more to add to that? He curled his hands into fists, clenched his jaw. The vein at the side of his gorgeous face throbbed like a pulse. She wondered if it'd pop. You don't understand. It's best to keep things casual. Oh, that fucking asshole. Casual. If she wanted casual, she had 10 exes willing to give her that. The whole point of finally giving in to the strange connection she'd felt with him was that she thought things would be different. Fuck casual. She stomped away. Wait, he said behind her. I'm no good for you. Spare me your self-pitying excuses. She threw over her shoulder. If you weren't good for me, then you wouldn't have fucked me last night. She stopped and spun on her heels. Oh, wait. She tapped her chin. I get it. You are good for that, but not for anything else, huh? No. Yes. She turned and continued marching forward, Good to know you have this argument down pat.
Stop walking away, he growled. I'm trying to speak to you.
She stopped again. And I'm trying to ignore you. Get with the program. He curled a hand around her arm and pulled her to face him, making her stumble in the process. He wrapped his other hand around her waist and pushed her against a tree. Her back was plastered against the hard trunk, while he pressed his body to her front. He cupped her face to keep her from looking away.
Listen to me,
he rumbled softly.
I want you. I want you more than my next breath.
His hold on her face softened when she didn't fight to escape.
I'd give up whatever life I have left to be with you, but I can't promise you forever.
Lord, how could he say things like that and then expect her to act like they'd only had some one-night stand? He was messing with her head, and fuck, with her heart too. What is it you want? She breathed. I don't understand. I'm getting mixed signals, and it's confusing. Frustration filled his gaze, along with a flash of fire. He pulled away from her.
I want you. Us. No expectations. No commitments.
Her face burned as if he'd slapped her. So good enough to fuck, but not good enough long-term, huh? She shook her head. Fuck you, Victor. You can take your offer and shove it. She slid away from the tree and glared down the path, where she saw arrows farther down. Don't bother following me. I'm not interested in anything else you have to say. She marched away, her body numb and her heart empty. She'd come to another world to be treated worse than she had been on Earth. Great. Apparently there were jerks everywhere, no matter the planet. "22. Another burst of fire flew out of Victor's dragon's throat. He couldn't stop him. The beast had taken control, and there was nothing Victor could do. Not that he could with how furious he was with himself and the world. The fading connection between him and the dragon grew fainter. At the moment, he felt as if the dragon was trying to communicate, but he didn't understand what the animal wanted. One thing was for sure. The dragon was angry. Victor flew home in a rage. There, Breck waited for him. He threw clothes on and met him in his office.
You do realize she doesn't know you're dying,
Breck said the moment he walked in the door.
Yes, I do. It's best to keep it that way. The last thing I need is pity. If she wanted to be with me, she'd have agreed to my request. Keep things casual?
Breck winced.
Are you so out of touch with women that you really expected that to work? She's smart. I told her I couldn't. I didn't say I didn't want to be with her.
Breck shook his head.
Wow, what a play on words.
He marched to one of Victor's chairs and sat, lifting his legs to his feet on the ottoman next to him.
You should just tell her. She'll probably understand that a lot better.
Maybe. Or she'd look at him with a pity in her eyes that Victor would never be able to live with.
Are you going to the first flight?
Breck asked.
Becca told Charlotte how excited she is to see so many dragons flying together.
Fucking hell. Stupid Draken wanting the same woman Victor did.
I don't know. You've never missed the first flight, Vic.
Breck shrugged.
It's not my business, but why don't you offer to take her on the first flight? Draken won't argue with you. We both know who rules this family.
It used to be Victor, back when he was in control of his dragon and his life. Another bout of fire heated his throat. His dragon was angry once again, and he couldn't figure out why. Unless he was upset over the same thing Victor was, Draken and Becca on the first flight. His office door burst open, and Razzie rushed inside.
Victor, this isn't working, she shouted, ignoring Breck's presence. We've hurt Becca's feelings. She won't look me in the eye anymore. His sister threw herself into his arms and started crying.
Calm down, Raz.
Don't, she sniffled. Don't tell me to calm down. She was my friend, and we hurt her feelings.
Did she stop talking to you?
Victor asked, patting his sister on the back. No, she's being super nice and acting like nothing's wrong, but I see the sadness in her eyes, she wailed. We did that. She pulled away from him, tears staining her cheeks. We have to fix it. You have to fix it.
Great. Just what he needed. Razzie, she's fine. Trust me.
She shook her head and pulled away from him. She's not fine, and if you don't fix this, then I will. He watched her run out of his office. He ran restless fingers through his short hair and growled.
Great. Fucking great.
Breck sat up and sighed.
I told you to talk to her. Tell her what's going on. You'd be surprised. She might be just what you need.
He didn't even know what he needed at this point. Between his dragon fighting him for control and his emotional desire for more time with Becca, he didn't know what to do. "23. Becca fought hard not to roll her eyes in front of her undesired and unexpected guest. I said I'd go, Draken. There was no need to come. He smiled and nodded.
I understand, but with it being just a few days away, I wanted to make sure you would still join us.
She glanced at Charlotte and bit her tongue when her sister grinned. I'll be there. I promise I'll show up. If he asked her again, she'd throw the piece of cake on her plate at him.
Wonderful. There is one more thing I wanted to ask. Would you ride on my back?
She frowned and shot another glance at her sister, who had her eyes wide and shook her head slightly. I'm not sure.
Think about it,
he suggested.
Just think about it. I have to go, but let me know before our flight.
He left the house, and she turned to her sister. What the hell did he mean? A new knock sounded from the front door, and she rushed to open it. She blinked and moved back, watching Aurora's favorite matchmaker waltz inside. Jerry! Charlotte grinned and ran to hug the older woman. Thank you for making the time to come over. Jerry gave Becca a penetrating look and then shook her head. Is it really so hard for people to follow instructions? She sat and huffed. They ask for mates, I get them mates, then they fuck it up. Becca and Charlotte shared a look before sitting near Jerry. Charlotte leaned forward in her seat. What's happened? That dragon, Jerry snapped. I have met my share of hard-headed males, but he takes the cake. She glanced at Becca. If I didn't know how you felt about him, I'd kick him off my client list and move on to finding you someone else. Wow, Becca said. Victor? Has he come to see you? Jerry nodded. Try to keep up, child. Of course he has. A long time ago, asking me to find his mate. All roads lead to you. She frowned. But if he hasn't made it to you, then something went wrong somewhere. I'm not his mate, Becca said. He doesn't even want a relationship with me, much less a long-term commitment. He was very clear about that. Jerry growled and slammed her hand on her lap. Something's wrong here, and I know it's not me. She gave Becca a serious stare. I will figure this out, and when I do, I will smack some sense into that dragon. You two belong together. Nice to hear that, considering he didn't think so.
Becca tried to think of a good excuse to not ride with Draken during the first flight. Unfortunately, fear of flying was not a good one, because someone had mentioned to him she dove off a cliff a week ago. So yeah, lovely.
"Tell him you're sick," Charlotte whispered. "He'll know I'm lying. He's a shifter," Becca muttered. "Oh, yeah, I forgot about that."
Charlotte walked beside her, appearing perfectly comfortable in this new world.
"I'm just going to tell him the truth, and hopefully he'll understand I'm not interested."
She stomped on the grass.
"Why didn't you tell me before he showed up that my flying with him was so significant?"
Charlotte shrugged.
"I didn't know you said you'd fly with him. I thought you were going to watch." "I was going to watch, from his dragon's grasp," she huffed. "Just wait for me back there."
She pointed at a large tree away from the people. "24. The crowds gathered at the edge of a massive cliff where they'd all taken off. She moved around people, leaving Charlotte behind, and went in search of Draken. She found him at the front, speaking to a group of men. She smiled when she caught his attention and motioned for him to come closer.
"Rebecca, I'm so glad you could make it. You'll love the view from my dragon."
She pursed her lips and started talking.
"I'm sorry, Draken. I didn't know the ritual of having a woman fly from your grasp or on your back meant she was special to you, or that she would be your partner."
She took a breath and went on.
"I think you're a nice guy, but I don't like you like that."
Cold fury sparked in his eyes.
"I see."
She tried to speak softly so they weren't overheard.
"I'm sorry."
Without saying anything else, she rushed through the crowd towards Charlotte, but too many people started to shift, tearing out of their clothes, keeping her rooted to the spot. She watched in awe as every colored dragon she could have ever imagined took to the skies. Instead of going back to Charlotte, she ran to the edge of the cliff to watch them fly as a group. Greens, purples, oranges, red, browns, yellows, blacks, and so many hues and sizes she had trouble keeping track. She smiled wide, watching the group fly off together. She noticed a red dragon turn around, heading back to the cliff. That person must have forgotten something. She searched for Charlotte, spotting her off to the side. An expression of terror twisted Char's face. A shadow fell over Rebecca, taking away the sun's warmth. She whipped around to see the dragon swoop down, much too close. She ran, but was whisked up into the air, caged in massive talons.
"Becca!"
Charlotte screamed from the cliff. Rebecca didn't attempt anything as stupid as trying to get out of the dragon's claws. They were really high, and she was already hyperventilating from knowing she could be let loose and fall to her death. She curled her arms around one of the talons and hugged it for dear life, with her eyes closed. It was ironic that she'd been dying to see the Dragos land from the skies, and now that she was getting the chance, she couldn't open her eyes. The dragon vibrated, and she swore she was going to lose her breakfast. With a sudden dive, the dragon lowered until she was on the top of a tower. She had no idea where, but she wouldn't be able to get down until he let her. He loosened his grip on her, shaking her off when she clung to his claw. She glanced around the little space and then back at the dragon. "You son of a bitch! Get me down from here!" His reply was to shoot a burst of fire right above her head, not low enough to burn, but enough for her to feel the heat. Great warning. She didn't know what to do. There were no cell phones in Aurora. She couldn't call Charlotte and tell her where she was. Not that she knew. There was no GPS, and if there were, she wouldn't know how to figure it out. A loud roar sounded behind her. The golden dragon with angry eyes she'd come to know as Victor shot forward above her head and charged Draken. Victor bit Draken's wing. Draken pulled away, snapping his teeth at Victor's dragon. They fought overhead, slamming into trees. Cracking and crashing sounds of the trunks going down exploded around them. Victor bit Draken's claw. They tumbled through the air, wings flapping noisily in the wind. Victor slammed his tail into Draken's side, the giant thorns slashing long gouges into the smaller dragon. She gripped the stones, making up the tower. Her heart pumped hard in her chest. She might be pissed as hell at Victor, but she didn't want him hurt. Victor opened his massive mouth and bit down on Draken's foot. Draken tried to shake him off. They whirled in circles, making Becca dizzy with fear. Draken thrashed his assault on Victor. It was horrible, but she wanted Victor to win. Draken swung his tail around, bashing Victor's head repeatedly until he released Draken's foot. The massive dragon shot forth, slamming Draken into the side of a hill. The ground shook. She watched in horror as Draken pounded his tail into Victor's side. Victor let out an angry roar and snapped scores of teeth on Draken's shoulder, striking his tail hard against Draken's wings. Victor pummeled again and again, tearing a hole through one of Draken's wings. Draken braced on the side of the mountain, then shoved Victor off. The golden dragon's wing caught in a jumble of trees, keeping him stuck long enough for Draken to make a getaway. That rat bastard. She watched him struggle to fly with the hole in his wing. She swung her gaze to where Victor struggled to get loose. It took a few tries and a lot of growling, but he freed himself. Settling on the tower, he lowered his head for her to climb. After a few slips and slides, she held tightly, holding on to his horns as best as she could. He kept the ride smooth. Although she was scared shitless, no seatbelts on a dragon, she managed to keep it together. Once they arrived at his castle, he set her down in a clearing leading inside. She slid off and watched him shift out of his dragon. She bit her lip to stop herself from gaping. She had a very clear memory of his naked body, but under the light of the sun, his skin sparkled with perspiration. Muscles, corded with tension, flexed and held her entranced. "Thank you," she said. He gave a sharp nod and turned to the castle. She followed after him, trying unsuccessfully not to stare at his sexy ass. She wanted so badly to slap his cheeks that she heard the stinging smack in her mind. They walked through the door, and a man, who she swore appeared out of thin air, handed Victor a rope. She glared at the idiot who gave him the material to cover his amazing body. He continued down a hallway, and she still followed. Why? She had no clue. He'd saved her, and that meant something. He entered her room, and she went in. Too late, she realized it was his bedroom. She stopped a few feet inside. He didn't. He continued to a massive wall of glass, revealing the outdoors. She bit her lip and watched the robe come off. That's when she noticed the scratches on his back. She'd been so focused on his ass, she hadn't seen them. Taking quiet steps, she shut the door behind her and made her way across the room to where he stood. "Thank you," she whispered, wanting badly to reach out and touch him. "25. Victor fought the anger riding his veins. He'd wanted to destroy Draken, his own family. Even though Draken told him he hadn't been looking to harm Becca, Victor's dragon didn't give a fuck. He needed to be dead. If Victor hadn't gotten caught up in the tree branches, he'd have killed his cousin. "You don't need to thank me," he said, watching her in the reflection of the window glass. "Yes, I do. You saved my life." She glanced at her hands and then at his shoulders. No one has ever done something like that before.
Been abducted by a lot of dragons in the past, have you?
She jerked her gaze to his head and glared. "No. You know, you're a real asshole," she said. "I let go of all the crap you said and try to show appreciation, and you're still being a jerk." He turned to face her. Her eyes widened, her gaze clashing with his.
"I'm a jerk?"
She nodded, taking a step to the side. "Yes, you are. I'm a pretty laid-back person, but you've managed to piss me off at every turn since I met you."
"I said you don't need to thank me, and you don't. I'd have fought him to my death if it meant saving you,"
he said flatly. Her brows drew down, and she closed the distance between them. "Do you see what you are doing?" She lifted a hand and poked him in the chest with her index finger. "You say shit like that, and then tell me you want to keep things casual." He grabbed her by the arms and pressed her against the glass.
"I can't give you more than that. It's impossible."
Anger flashed in her eyes. "You know something? Fuck you. I'm done trying to understand you. These games you play where you act like you want me more than anyone else, only to push me away, they're fucking exhausting, and I don't have the patience for it. I'm going back to Earth." She wiggled to get out of his hold, but couldn't, so she glared at him harder. "Let me go." He should. He would only make things worse by holding on to her. She needed to distance herself from him. But he didn't care what he should do at the moment. Fuck being nice. He wanted Becca. Her sweetness and understanding had ensnared his heart.
"No."
She opened her mouth, ready to say something he knew she'd later on regret. His head dropped, his lips taking hers in a hungry kiss, a kiss he'd been unable to ignore since the last time he'd had her body in his grasp. His need for her felt overwhelming, like he was losing himself without her. Every emotion she pulled out of him had filled him with desperation. She fought him at first, pushing his body, but her anger redirected the moment he plunged his tongue into her mouth. A soft moan sounded from her. She raked her nails over his shoulders, gripping and squeezing. Lust hazed his thinking. He yanked at her clothes, tearing at the material and touching her everywhere he could. Their kiss turned wilder, bolder. Tongues mated. He groaned, and she sighed. He cupped the heavy weight of her breasts, grazing his thumbs over her nipples, tightening the tiny butts. Pulling his mouth from hers, he licked and nipped his way to her tits. She arched her back, offering them to him. He laved her warm skin and sucked a nipple into his mouth. "Oh, God!" She gripped his short hair with one hand and his shoulder with the other. There was so much beauty in watching her enjoy his mouth on her breast, sucking and fondling until she squirmed from foot to foot. He let go of her tit, continuing his trek down to her soft belly. He bit the smooth area around her belly button, licking and sucking the little hole. "Oh, fuck, that feels good," she mumbled. He kneeled between her legs, mesmerized by the heat of her pussy and the delectable scent of her desire. He glanced up and licked his lips. Her beautiful curves glowed with perspiration. He wanted to kiss his way up her body and claim every dip on her. "Hang on," he said. She opened her eyes and looked around until she saw 2 leather straps hanging to either side of her head. She looped her arms through the openings and gripped the leather tight. "Victor," she moaned, "this will take little effort on your part if you keep me waiting much longer. I'm so close." She gasped when he ran a finger between her lips into her pussy. "So close." "26. Becca clung to the leather straps for dear life. She was going to lose her mind if Victor didn't do more than tease her. "I love your scent." He inhaled and pressed his nose into her pussy. "I want to spend all night fucking you with my tongue, making you scream." Hell yes. She could go for some, or a lot, of that. "Please," she said breathlessly. He grabbed one of her large thighs and draped it over his shoulder, making her pelvis tilt toward his face. Then he did the same with the other, until her back was pressed on the glass, and she was using the leather straps to hold herself upright. Suddenly, he started to stand. She squealed. The leather strap shortened the straighter he got, until he was standing at full height, her arms pulled above her head, and his face in her pussy. She leaned back farther, wiggling her lower body closer to his mouth. He held her up by her ass cheeks, pulling her pussy flush against his lips, as if she weighed next to nothing. He didn't even lose his breath, standing with her on his shoulders. "Victor," she gasped. "Are you insane?" He looked at her inner thigh and glanced up. "Why would I be insane?" "I'm a really heavy girl," she stated matter-of-factly. "You're going to hurt yourself holding me up like this." A slow, wicked grin spread over his lips. "Heavy? Maybe on sarcasm." He chuckled. "You're so small, I could hold you like this all day." He rubbed his nose on her clit, and she saw stars. "I just might, too. It's a beautiful view I've got." He nipped at one of her pussy lips and grunted. "And you taste better than any sweet. Fucking perfect." She groaned. He tongued her pussy like he was reaching for her fucking soul. Her belly quivered, and her pussy throbbed. She wanted him inside her. "Victor, I need more. I need you." He rumbled, sucking her clit and sending vibrations shooting up her back. "God, Victor." She couldn't stop her hips from rocking. "I want you fucking me, your cock thrusting deep, stretching me until I can take no more." She glanced down and met his bright, golden gaze as he pressed his mouth over her clit. "I want you to come in me. I want to feel you, all of you, every drop of your cum, making my body your home." He sucked her clit harder, sending her over the edge. She gripped the leather and screamed, angling her head back and pressing her pussy against his mouth. Tides of bliss shook her to the core. She moaned through harsh puffs of breath. He lowered her slowly, the leather once again extending. Once she was on the ground, he held her up by the waist until she was loose of the straps. She curled her legs around his waist and pressed her mouth to his. Good God, the taste. It was sexy as hell to taste herself on his lips. She licked his mouth, his face and jaw. Fuck. She wanted to lick him from head to toe. "Take me to bed," she ordered between kisses. He turned, carrying her to the edge of his massive bed. It had to be twice the size of a regular king, with enough space to hold more than a few bodies. Either he liked his space in bed, or he held orgies on the regular. She'd rather think the former than the latter. He placed her on the bed, and she scooted to the center, bent her finger motioning him forward. "Come here." He smiled and followed her to the center of the bed.
"Have something in mind?"
She licked her lips and stroked her gaze down his body. He had such an amazing physique, athletic, with enough muscle to make a woman drool. Her vision shot down to his massive erection. Lord have mercy. He was hard, and beads of pre-cum gathered at the head of his cock. "I have a very big something in mind," she grinned. She pushed him back. His head hit the pillows, and she knelt between his legs. She loved that look of confusion on his face.
"What are you doing?"
She lowered her head to his dick, licking around the rim. He groaned, and she smiled. "I'm getting a taste of you." She curled her tongue around his cock and licked up his shaft. His hips bucked, pushing his cock into her lips.
"Fuck, your mouth is so hot,"
he grunted.
"Your tongue is so wet and soft."
He pushed her hair out of his view and held it behind her head.
"Do it, Becca. Suck my cock with your beautiful mouth. Stroke your sexy tongue over me."
She opened wide and took him down her throat. Well, as much of him as she could. The reality was he was long and thick. Still, she enjoyed the feeling of him filling her mouth.
"That's it. Suck me,"
he said in a rough voice.
"Do it, and I'll fuck your pretty little pussy."
She pulled back, letting him slide out of her lips, full of her saliva. Then she took him in again, farther than before. His cock hit the back of her throat, and she gagged.
"Yes,"
he encouraged, gripping her hair tighter. The only sound to be heard was wet suction noises from her.
"That sound is so fucking sexy when you make it."
She propelled back and swished her tongue over his slick length from side to side. He thrust into her mouth, pulling and pushing her head over his cock. His body tensed. Instead of slowing, she sped up. He grunted and lifted his hips off the bed, trying to go deeper into her mouth. She grasped his shaft with one hand, jerking and sucking, while she fondled his balls with the other hand. "27. He sucked in harsh breaths, his abs contracting with each intake of air. She sucked and pumped harder, watching his body tense to granite. A thought crossed her mind. She slapped her hand on his thigh, scraping her nails into his leg in conjunction with her sucking and jerking. He pulled on her hair hard as he came. A loud roar sounded from him as semen jutted out. She sucked fast, some of it going down her throat, sweet as candy. But his thick semen filled her mouth. She released him while he was still coming. She held his cock over her tits, letting the stream of his seed coat her chest down to her belly. To her surprise, he didn't go limp. He was still hard as a rock and looking ready to fuck her into the next galaxy. She kneeled back, glancing down at the mess covering her body. Driven by pure instinct, she slid her hands over her chest, massaging his cum on her breasts.
"That is fucking gorgeous,"
he growled, sitting up with a lot more speed than she'd seen in him.
"You want my scent on you, my beautiful Becca?"
She nodded, lifting a sticky finger up to her lips and sucking. "I love your taste." She didn't ask how 1 second she was kneeling in front of him and the next he was carrying her right back to the massive glass wall. What?
I want to fuck you, my beautiful. I'm going to fuck you under the light of both moons.
He placed her hands on the warm glass, pulling her hips back and spreading her legs wide.
I'll fuck your hot, wet pussy from behind.
He licked the back of her neck.
You'll want me to.
He slid his tongue down her spine until he reached the curve of her ass.
There's no denying it. You'll want me to make you scream.
He kissed her cheeks.
Make your legs shake and your pussy burn.
He spread her ass cheeks and ran his tongue down to her hole.
To come inside you and fuck you until your body can't take anymore.
Yes, she nodded, her head dropping forward and her nipples already beaded tightly from need. Do it! White-hot fire spread through her body as he flicked his tongue in circles over her asshole. God damn, she'd never had anyone do that before. It felt strange and fucking awesome at the same time. He growled, going down between her cheeks and back up to the curve of her ass. He placed a hand on her hip, pushing his cock into her pussy. It was even better to feel him taking her this way. Her pussy contracted around his cock as he slid into her.
Ah, yes,
he groaned.
So tight.
She choked on a breath, putting more of her weight on her hands. She angled her hips farther back, pushing into his cock. He started slow, but suddenly drove his cock into her ferociously. Hard. Fast. She clawed at the glass, looking for leverage. He grabbed her arm with his other hand, fucking her deep and rough. With every stroke into her, his cock rubbed a new angle. Yes, she mumbled. Her pussy felt on fire. She was so close to orgasm, but not close enough. The hand on her waist moved to the front of her right hip, his fingers digging into her flesh. Thrust after thrust, he claimed her with his cock, dominating, owning, mastering her with every drive. The hand on her hip and arm heated. The closer she got to finding release, his hands turned warmer on her skin. With another passionate drive, he plunged deep into her, pulsing inside her, and finally taking her over the edge. She dropped her head forward on a scream. Her pussy clamped tightly around his dick. He slowed his thrusts, tensing. A loud roar sounded from him at her back. He spilled his cum deep in her contracting channel. Her body and brain refused to work. It was a good thing he was easily able to pick her up and carry her back to the bed. She was taken aback when he pressed something, and the wall of glass opened to let in a cooling wind. Her breath was still choppy when he lay beside her, holding her close, letting the cool air from the outdoors wash over them. She needed to move on. Victor might be the best man she'd ever met in bed, but emotionally, he was tearing her apart. She wanted badly to be with him, but refused to beg. If he didn't want her, then she wouldn't mention it again. He slid his hand over her belly and traced circles over her skin with so much tenderness, she wasn't sure what to think. Tomorrow, she'd cut off all ties to the commitment-phobic dragon. Tonight she'd keep him for herself. "28. Becca glanced at the marks and didn't know what to do. He'd marked her twice. "Becca!" Charlotte called from the other side of the door. "Can I come in?" She threw on a long-sleeved robe and opened the door. "What's going on?" Charlotte gave a sad look. "I'm sorry about you and Victor." She sighed, her shoulders dropping. "I really thought he'd get his shit together and realize it's better to have you for a short time than not at all." Becca frowned. "Why would I want him for a short time? Am I not worth long-term?" Charlotte's eyes widened. No, that's not it at all. But you know, right?
Becca shook her head.
Know what?
About his dragon and the mate thing? Charlotte sat on Becca's bed and started wringing her fingers. He needed to find a mate before it was too late. If he didn't, his dragon would disconnect from him, and soon the dragon would die, and then he would too.
What?
Becca gasped.
I don't understand.
Well, you see, he didn't find his mate, so that means he's got very little time left. She gaped.
Why is it so important that he find this mate?
Charlotte made a frustrated face and shoved long curls over her shoulder. Normally, the mate is the one woman he is destined to be with. Only she gets his mark, and she can save him.
Mark?
Becca asked, her heart beating at twice the normal speed.
Yes.
Charlotte folded her legs on top of the bed. When a dragon mates, he will instantly mark his mate with the mark of his dragon. I've been told it's different for each family, and it looks like a tattoo.
You said instantly?
She frowned. The marks had taken days to show up on Becca's arm and hip. Like a photo being developed, the outline had showed up at first, then the faint color became brighter and the image clearer. Within a week, she had what looked like 2 brand-new tattoos of a golden dragon on her arm and hip.
Yep. Anyway, with Victor dying, I didn't think he'd be so hard-headed that he'd turn love away to focus on death.
She inhaled loudly and let it out quickly.
You guys are so perfect for each other. Even I can see it.
Becca wasn't sure what to do. On the one hand, she was glad she was Victor's mate. It meant he wasn't going to die. He'd mated and marked her, and now that meant he'd live. At least from what she knew, that's what it would mean. On the other hand, she didn't want to tell him. He refused to love her because of his situation. If he couldn't accept his feelings for her without knowing she was his dragon's mate, then what kind of relationship could they hope to have? Victor didn't know why, but he felt different. His link with the dragon had started to strengthen. Was this what happened at the end? The link helped him think clearer. He wasn't angry, and his focus shifted to Becca. His office door burst open, and Razzie marched in with an angry scowl.
How could you, Vic?
She slapped her hand on her tiny waist and tapped her booted foot.
What exactly did I do now?
You let her go. You let her go and you love her,
she said.
Why?
He'd been debating for days how to approach his need for Becca. It had grown every day she was away from him. It wasn't even the lust driving his thoughts anymore. It was emotions. His heart ached for her touch, her smile. He missed simple things like being near her.
It wasn't fair to keep her when I can't give her the time she needs,
he said. It hurt him to the depths of his soul, but he knew her attaching to him would be worse later on for her. The anger in Razzie's eyes was replaced with sorrow.
You're a good man, Vic, but you're stupid.
He didn't get a chance to reply. She whirled around and headed out. Before she walked away, she stopped at the door.
I'm going on a picnic with Becca by the giant rainbow tree. She doesn't feel comfortable coming here any longer.
Her words stabbed him in the gut. The last thing he'd wanted was Becca to feel uncomfortable in the castle. He paced his office, wondering when the thoughts of her would stop consuming him. The answer was clear. Never. "29. Becca sighed. On one side, she had Charlotte, Jerry, and Razzie trying to make her feel better about Victor, and in the process, making her feel worse. She didn't want to talk about him, or the fact that the man didn't want to commit to her,
even if he thought he was dying. Then there was Laena, making stupid remarks every few moments.
Aunt Laena, Razzie grinned. I said you could join us because I thought you were right. You shouldn't be punished for what Draken did. But can you stop trying to defend him every few seconds? We aren't interested in why he did what he did. He was wrong for abducting Becca. Period. Bam. Becca tried not to smile at the polite but firm way Razzie took down her aunt. I know, darling, but he is truly a good man, she said, giving Becca a side glare. Some men just don't know how to handle rejection. Becca's anger rose. Maybe you should have taught him he's not always getting what he wants, she snapped, instead of looking for excuses for what he did. Really, Razzie? Laena stood. You're not letting some earth whore speak to me that way, are you? Charlotte, Jerry, and Razzie jumped to their feet. Becca was the last to rise. Whore? Becca asked between gritted teeth. Where the hell are you getting your information, you old hag? I knew you had no shame, Laena spat. I knew you were letting Victor manhandle you under the table. We all knew. Mother! Draken yelled, coming into view from between the trees. I didn't ask you to bring her here for this. Laena rushed off to Draken's side. I'm sorry, son. I don't understand what you see in her. Victor's already had her. He didn't want her. Say another thing, you crazy bitch, and I'll forget you're almost twice my age and show you what an earth ass-whoopin' feels like. Becca promised. Go on, say one more thing. Becca, Draken said, taking a step toward her. Jerry and Charlotte rushed to stand in front of her. Razzie moved ahead of the line to get in front of them. I promise I won't hurt you. I promise I won't hurt you, he said. Razzie turned to look over her shoulder at Becca. He's being honest. We'd know if he was lying. Becca met Charlotte's worried gaze and Jerry's angry one. It's your decision, Charlotte said. But if he tries anything, Jerry added, we're right here. Razzie nodded. I can fly. They were trying so hard to make her feel better, but Becca knew it was unnecessary. She took a few steps forward and stopped some feet away from the others. She waited for him to approach her. I'm sorry, Becca, Draken said, marching toward her. I let my frustration and anger control me. What I did was wrong. She nodded. I appreciate the apology, but let's just forget it. He took another step. I was hoping you'd forgive me. I'd like to start again. He offered her a hand. She met his gaze. I'm not looking for a relationship, Draken. I'm not the one for you. He closed the distance between them. Just give me a chance. I can be your friend first, if that makes you feel better. We can start slow. She shook her head and stepped away. You don't understand. I already love someone else. Anger brightened in his red eyes. He doesn't want you, he spat. He's going to die. He continued closing in. I want you. I want you for myself. Fuck Victor. Once he's gone, you and I can rule together. He shot a hateful look at Razzie. She's no competition. I can take her out, and then we can own Dragos land. Are you fucking crazy? She gasped. He grasped at her arms. Let me show you what it means to be appreciated. I will make you my queen. Victor's going to die, and I'll be there to replace him when he does. She didn't make a struggling move. Not when her anger had gone through the roof. You think his dying will change my mind? That doesn't make any difference where emotions are concerned, she said. Thanks, but no thanks. He started to squeeze at her arms when Victor showed up. He marched forward, yanked Draken off Becca, and hooked a left, catching Draken's jaw and sending him flying in a full turn.
He landed on his ass, bleeding from his lip.
"Stay away from her,"
Victor growled.
"She's mine."
"Victor, you don't want her," Draken yelled.
"Besides, you're as good as dead."
Victor dropped down to the ground, picked Draken up by his collar, and tossed him against a tree.
"Next time you touch her, I'll kill you."
A collective gasp went through the women. "Hang on a fucking second here," Becca retorted. "You can't claim I'm yours and do your He-Man session, then tell me you don't want me." Laena rushed to Draken in full screams. She turned to them, her voice filled with fury. "This family is a disgrace. It would be too soon if I never see any of you again." Draken wiped at the blood on his lips and leaned on his mother. They left, the others staring behind them. Victor took his sweet time, turning around to look at Becca. When he did, she was waiting for his answer. She glanced over her shoulder and saw Razzie, Charlotte, and Jerry quietly moving back to give them space.
"Rebecca."
He ran his fingers through his hair.
"I can't stay away from you."
"Nice way to get this going," she said, raising a brow.
"What do you want to hear? That I love you?"
He growled.
"Yes, I love you. I don't know when or how, but I couldn't stop the emotion from taking control of my heart. I tried to do what was best for you by keeping you away."
She shoved her hands into her loose-knit pants. "Why was that best for me? I would think if you loved me, being with you is the best thing for me." He shook his head.
"I do love you. Totally. So fully it hurts my soul to know I'll leave you alone."
He glanced at his hands and then back to her face.
"I'm dying."
She cleared her throat, emotion clogging her airways, making her eyes well up with moisture. "No, you're not." He nodded.
"I couldn't find my dragon's mate."
He shrugged.
"But none of that matters, because I found the woman I love. I found someone to fill my heart with love."
"30." She tried to contain the tears, but it was damn hard with the things he was saying. "Victor."
"No, let me speak. I was wrong in saying what I did. If I only have a few days to live, then I want to spend them with you. No one else."
He gave her such a tender look, she didn't know what to say.
"I may die tomorrow, but as long as I have you by my side, it's okay."
She started crying at that point. He finally realized he wanted to be with her, whether she was his dragon's mate or not. "You're not dying, you hard-headed dragon," Jerry said, walking up to them. Becca tried to agree with her, but the knot in her throat was too big. She swallowed what felt like sandpaper. "Jerry," Charlotte said, "maybe we can wait until later to try and make him not give up on life." "Yeah," Razzie whispered. "He's finally admitting his feelings." Jerry rolled her eyes and turned back to Becca and Victor. "You," she said pointedly at Victor, "are not dying." Then she turned to Becca and grinned. "And you are much too smart for your own good." Becca smiled through her tears and nodded. Jerry pushed back Becca's long, flowy sleeves so everyone could see the golden dragon tattoo on her arm. "You found your dragon's mate, Victor. She's right here," Jerry said. Becca tried speaking again. "It's true." She met Victor's shocked gaze. "You're not dying."
"I didn't see that on you when you were at the castle,"
Victor exclaimed, moving forward and taking in her massive dragon mark. "It took a lot of days to develop, but I have 2, she said, lifting her top to show him the one on her hip. He slid his finger over the mark, curling his hand around her hips and hugging her to him.
I don't understand,
Charlotte said, her tone more than a little confused.
If she was his mate, why didn't he instantly recognize her from the beginning? Isn't that the norm?
Yes, unless you're dying, Jerry said. Victor's disconnect with his dragon and their fading link meant the dragon couldn't communicate with him like most dragons do. So while the dragon knew she was his mate, Victor didn't. It wasn't until the dragon marked her that it strengthened their bond again and gave Victor his life back.
Why?
Becca cleared her throat.
Why didn't you mark me the first time you know?
He wouldn't know, Jerry grinned. But I can deduce why. You see, for a marking to happen, the link has to be solid, and both the man and the dragon in full agreement of it taking place. It sounds like the weak link didn't allow for it the first time. She smiled. But your continued time together gave the dragon that extra strength to connect with Victor and make it happen that last time.
Okay, now that we've got that figured out, why don't the three of us go for a stroll?
Charlotte said to Jerry and Razzie. Jerry nodded. I knew there had to be a reason for all this nonsense. Becca watched them disappear between the trees and glanced up at Victor.
I couldn't tell you about it until I knew you wouldn't reject me because you were dying.
He nodded. You've saved my life in more ways than one. She curled her arms around his neck and kissed him. She'd missed him so much. The past days had been so empty, and every time she glanced at her mark, a bout of sadness had taken over her heart. He pulled back, his eyes no longer filled with anger or frustration, or even sadness. There was love in them, so much love. If I only had one day to live, I'd still choose to spend it loving you. She kissed him again, harder, deeper. There would be no dying for her dragon. It was time to live. She pulled back and smiled.
I love you, you big grumpy dragon.
He smiled. So many nice words coming out of your beautiful mouth. He caressed her face, hooking his hand around her neck and holding her still. I love you, Becca. I love your sass, your humor, and most of all, I love your heart. She hugged him hard, finally able to be happy with the one man she wanted.
You know just what to say to get a girl to take her panties off, don't you?
He chuckled loudly. I know just the spot where you can get a great view of the sky while I get a taste of you. Yeah, he knew just what to say. Epilogue. Jerry stared at the mess her apartment had turned into while she'd been gone. Thank God she had so many people helping take care of her stuff while she'd been in Aurora. Damn it, she was definitely going to need another assistant. She'd managed to sit for 5 minutes before her communicator from Aurora buzzed. Now what? She pressed the button, and Corell, one of her favorite people, popped up in a hologram.
Corell,
she sighed. I just sat down. There better be a damn good reason for you to be calling me. He nodded. There's someone here in urgent need of your services. Jerry sighed. It was always urgent. Wonderful. Who is it now? His hologram stared straight at her. Me. The end. A letter from Jerry Wilder. Dear readers, I understand your love for books is what keeps you coming back to PDA and Millie Taiden. If you enjoyed this book, I urge you to please tell your friends, share the links, and help Millie keep telling my adventures in matchmaking. Another way to show your support is to write a review on Amazon or Audible. It doesn't have to be long. Just a few words can be a great way to encourage Millie into writing more of my stories. Do you have a question for me? Want to be matched? Check out Millie's Facebook page, and I will answer questions as Millie allows with her crazy schedule. Who knows? Your questions may show up in the next letter from my part of Millie's book. Someone emailed Millie to ask if I ever planned on doing a dragon mating. Well, scaling her dragon was for all you wonderful fans who wanted it. Recently, someone requested I help find a mate for Corel. We shall see. Until next time, now I must search out a new assistant. Again, G. This has been Scaling Her Dragon, BBW Paranormal Shapeshifter Romance, Paranormal Dating Agency, Book 8. Written by Millie Taiden. Narrated by Lauren Sweet. Copyright Lifetime by Millie Taiden. Production copyright 2015 by Millie Taiden.